Meeting of the Harwich Conservation Commission for March 6, 2019. The first item on the agenda is a discussion on 47 Harbor Road on possible deck expansion. Do we have somebody representing that project?
Yes.
Okay.
Come on up.
Please come forward.
Sorry we missed you today. Other side of the house.
Yeah, I guess so.
I saw the Jeep in the driveway,
Yeah, no problem.
but I looked around, we didn't want
Yeah,
to
yeah.
peer in.
No, I wish you had, yeah, I was there and just
We
looking around.
came in off Colonial.
Perfect, perfect.
So if you would, just state who you are and what you would like to do, and then I'll take it from there.
Perfect. My name is James Lipscomb. My family recently purchased 47 Harbor Road, building, or a home built in '84. And the deck off the back is old, needs to be replaced, and as part of that, I'd like to expand it off the house a little bit and down the length of the house.
Okay. So this was a little bit of a unique situation in that he's actually, because of the low topography, he's between Winchmere Harbor and Saquatucket Harbor. The top of Coastal Bank is pretty much where your house is, which is our resource area. Everything else is so low, though it is upland. It's not a wetland characteristics. It is all, the resource itself is where his house is, and that's where the deck is. There should be in your folders online, under plans, 47 Harbor in there for you. And because it's several hundred feet away from an actual salt marsh or something else, it's all upland vegetation, it's not dune or anything else like that, I thought it was worthy having this discussion. It's on a resource area within the 50-foot buffer, which we typically wouldn't, under normal circumstances, really be in favor of. It would be against our regs. But this is kind of an unusual circumstance where you essentially have floodplain, and then the coastal bank is defined by the floodplain at this site. So this is just for discussion to direct James. If you don't have to say you're going to approve it or not, but is it worth filing for? My recommendation would be a request for determination of applicability, filing for it,
Okay.
which is like a medium-sized filing.
Okay.
We can discuss.
Thanks, Amy.
Oh, yeah.
All right. You don't have any plans, right?
They're online.
Or just online?
I actually, here, Brad, I do have a copy. And you can, yeah. I do.
Well, let's go around and see if there's any questions from the commissioners. Paula, do you want to start?
We were there today, and how far out do you want to extend it width-wise? Not this one, depth-wise.
So the deck is currently 7.5 feet deep off the house. I wanted to extend another 5 feet, so it's about
Another
12
5.
feet. Yes, so right now, if you put a lawn chair or anything like that on, it'd be difficult walking around, just something that I could put some deck furniture up on.
So you want to go about 12 and a half feet out.
Correct.
How are you gonna support that? Are you gonna move the columns out further if you go that?
Yes, yeah, the columns need to be replaced as they are, just age, so it would be pushing those out where they are right now. I think there's sonotubes at the current columns, so those would be removed and pushed out 5 feet, and then extended down the length of the house.
Just from my perspective is where you're putting, even if you were to put them, it's already a disturbed area. You have the landings and the wall, the support,
Retaining
wall
wall.
out there and the driveway there, so I don't see that. It's already
Correct, yeah.
disturbed anyways, it's not like we're going into virgin territory there.
Correct, it's a deck that's over my driveway as it is, so it'd just be going out over the driveway a little bit further.
That's all right. John?
I don't have any questions. Okay, Carol?
I don't have any questions. As Stan said, the area has already been disturbed years and years and years ago. Are you going to keep the columns on the high side, or would it drop off?
Um,
You know, where it goes out, you've got another you've got a walkway width,
correct.
and then it sort of drops off.
Yes, yes, so it would be either, I have to figure out setbacks in one corner of the house. If I don't think at one part of the deck I could go out any further, it's, you know, just due to setback on the property line. So I think at the area that you're talking about, those would stay there. It would be more over the driveway that they would be.
Okay. I don't see any problem. It's
Over the resource.
Yeah, seems like the main factor is that you already have the driveway there. I wouldn't necessarily be in favor of expanding it into the untouched area.
Yes.
It's pretty straight, I'm sorry, are you done?
I'm done, yeah.
Looks pretty straightforward to me, and pretty much academic, really.
Okay. Well, then
So
we'll-
it's up to the commission how you would like to see it in terms of an application, if you'd like it to be request for determination. I don't think it's, a notice of intent is warranted for it. If you feel comfortable, we could do it administratively as well with those conditions, or like either admin review or RDA I would recommend for you.
I think I'd prefer your original recommendation for an RDA,
Okay.
so.
So we'll reach out to you. We don't need to vote on this. Is that a consensus really from everybody to have them file a request for determination of applicability?
Yep.
Okay. So we'll be in touch with you, either myself or Nicole, on how to do that.
Excellent, all right.
Okay.
Thanks, Ian.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you,
So
appreciate it.
thanks for coming down.
Okay, next on the agenda, we have a request for change of plans, 20 Chase Street, proposal to have minor changes to the configuration of dwelling and additional mitigation.
Good evening, David Little, Ryder and Wilcox, representing Lori Clark. Lori and her sister have been working with the architect since we originally had the plans approved. They were preliminary plans at that time, and they've made some interior changes and some exterior changes. So I have provided the commission with a revised site plan, but more importantly, I provided you with a 8.5 by 11 detail that very specifically shows the changes that have been made. The footprint, house footprint changes are negligible. The patio increased a little bit within the 0 to 50 foot buffer. We ended up with a 130 square foot increase in coverage within the 50 foot buffer and a 124 square foot reduction within the 50 to 100 foot buffer. So the net of that is that we are required to have for the changes, 142 more square feet of mitigation. I provided the site plan to Phil Cheney, and he added over where the large lean-to / shed is being removed, he added, he changed the planting that's proposed for there from 720 square feet to 862 square feet to accommodate the increase in coverage in accordance with your regulations. So the Clarks and their architect and Ryder and Wilcox are hopeful that you can find these changes as minor and accept the revised plans under the current order of conditions.
Thank you.
We did, and as an aside, the original project resulted with a net decrease of 551 square feet in the 0 to 50.
Okay, so, as actually, my point was gonna be what David just said, was that, what is being proposed is more than what was approved, but less than what was there previously. David, I apologize if we spoke on the phone and, I don't know if we spoke on the phone about this one, we talked about change in plan versus amendment with you. It was a little unclear to me. I do think this is doable, but I do see it as maybe possibly an amendment instead, because it's more in the 0 to 50. Maybe I misunderstood and I thought it was more in the 50 to 100, and if I did so, I really apologize to waste your time. But it is an overall increase of only 6 square feet in the entire buffer zone, but it is more in the 0 to 50 than we previously approved. So I think by definition of what kind of an amendment is to be versus a change in plan, I think we should see it in that form. Still, what is being proposed now is less than what's out there existing, so. And I agree with the additional mitigation plantings.
Thanks,
It's
Amy.
just a matter of how you want to deal with it, really.
Yep. We'll go around for comments. Paul, do you have any?
No, nothing right now.
Stan?
This is one I abstained on
Okay.
last time. But I do like your comparison. I think that's really gives a good picture as to what's being added and subtracted. I wish they were all like that when we do a comparison like that.
John, any comments?
Seems like a pretty minor change to me, but I'm inclined to go along with Amy's recommendation.
Sure.
It's up to you.
Carolyn?
It does seem like a minor change. It annoys me when people present plans to us and then we study them and work hard over them, and then they come back shortly afterwards with a change of plan that just pushes us just a little farther than what we approved. So we come back and say, this is just a minor change. Would we have approved this from the very beginning? I think we probably would have. But in general, I dislike people coming back with a change of plan. I know plans get changed in construction, but this looks like pretty much the same plan, only 5 feet farther out to me. So I don't see any problem with approving this, but it does annoy me.
Thank you.
Jim, any thoughts?
No, I don't have any comments.
No, to me, it's such a minor change, I really have no issue with it at all. It does annoy me a bit.
Thank you.
Well, it's up to you. You could go,
I agree with your recommendation, and I'll remind folks that we did discuss trying to reduce the footprint in the 0 to 50 for this proposal. It's a complete tear down, and we were looking for opportunities to reduce that footprint. And we went back and forth a little bit on the patio. So to me, I think I'd like to go with Amy's recommendation and have it come back as an amendment, because the point was discussed previously. Do we need a vote on that, Amy, or?
you could make a motion to have an amendment, and then we'll see if that passes, and if that doesn't go through, then there'd be a vote to accept it as a change in plan.
Okay.
Anybody can make a motion to whatever.
Do we have a clarification on the difference?
So a change in plan is almost like a technicality. It could be minor spelling errors, cutting corners for buildings, you know, like essentially like moving a little bit here, a little bit there. So you can technically do it as a change of plan. An amendment is when what is proposed is actually equal to or less than what was originally approved. So actually, this is more than what was originally approved, so you could have bumped it even. I don't want to bump it to a new notice of intent. But technically, it is a little bit more than what was approved. But I would say amendment because it is less than what is currently there. If you had a vacant lot and you proposed a 1,000 square foot house and you came back with a 1,100 square foot house, it would probably be an amendment on a vacant lot, something like that. Anyway.
If I may, the way I read DEP's guidance on this, it's if the amendment is within the scope of the original project. I don't think whether it's a little bit bigger or a little bit less, it's whether the amendment falls within the scope of what was originally approved. So I certainly think this would fall within the lines of being able to submit a request to amend the orders.
I agree. I know,
Okay.
it's close enough. Yes,
Yeah,
I agree.
I think we're in agreement there, and I'd like to make a motion that we encourage an amendment to the proposal for 20 Chase Street.
Second?
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
One abstention?
Two.
Two
Two
abstentions.
abstentions. All right, thank you.
Thank you.
next we have a request for determination of applicability for 16 Old Wharf Road, a proposal for a dwelling with septic system. You up for that too?
Thank you. David Little again,
Forgot to put you all together.
representing Carol and Ivar Joseph. Since we submitted the original request, we had a very, and it's kind of ironic that I'm doing this, we had a very minor change in the footprint of the plans that we submitted. So I have a revised set of plans, almost negligible from what was submitted, that I would like to submit to have this acted upon. I'm not trying to give the impression that I'm always coming in here with changes. I'm just trying to be honest.
Thank you.
So this property happens to be next door to the Adamo property that I was in a few weeks ago with. There's an existing dwelling on the property. We are proposing to tear the dwelling down, construct a new dwelling in essentially the same footprint but a different configuration, install a new septic system, but what we have here is a situation where in 2014, this area was mapped as an AE zone by FEMA, and so we have a good section of the property within the flood zone. So we are proposing to remove the cesspool that's located within the flood zone, construct a septic system outside of the flood zone, and construct a new dwelling, although different in configuration, pretty much within the same footprint as what exists on the site. We did stake it, if anybody went out to see. The limit of work protects the flood zone with the exception of the area where we need to remove the cesspool. That would be my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. Any comments on this one?
So essentially, David, it looks like the changes are, the new one has a bulkhead access, and that is that pretty much it?
That's pretty much it, Amy.
Okay.
It's the bulkhead, yes.
All right, so let me get my notes. So, this is directly next door to a project that we just approved, that was a vacant lot. This is, the old house that hasn't been lived in for a number of years. The only resource here is land subject to coastal storm flowage or flood zone. Other than the removal, as David said, of the existing cesspools that are in the flood zone, all the work is within the buffer zone to it. Town of Harwich is a little unique that we have a buffer to a flood zone, so here they are filing a request for determination from you. My conditions would be very similar to the conditions that we had on the previous plan, is that within the floodplain itself essentially it's a very treed area, that we leave it as being treed, and that if they want to do any work in there in the future, that they come and talk with us about it. And that if there are, because this is a tear down rebuild, there should be no other clearing of the site other than what's right around the building.
And
So-
the septic system.
And the septic system.
Absolutely.
Yep. So that's essentially, hold on, let me just check this. And we don't know how big the existing septic is. New septic will be outside the flood. And, nope, I'm recommending approval with a -3 determination, provided that no vegetation in the floodplain except for potentially hazard trees is removed, and that can be discussed at an on-site. Same thing, it just seems like we're tearing down and rebuilding, so we're not clear cutting the lot. And then our typical condition of no fertilization or chemical use on the property within our jurisdiction, roof runoff going to gutters, downspouts, dry wells, typical things. So recommend approval with a -3.
Thanks, Amy. Paul, or any?
No, I have none.
Stan?
No comment.
John?
No comment.
My only thought is just take down the least number of trees you can. The lot next to this has been leveled.
Yes,
And the lot next to it that we approved.
as Amy mentioned,
When
we're,
I went out and I flagged trees to stay with
I did
David.
meet Amy on the site prior to construction, and
Go again.
everything in the rear of the property,
Yeah,
with the
has been
exception
saved.
of 2 very large pitch pines,
Right.
has been saved,
Has been
and we're
saved.
not touching the flood zone on that
Right.
property either.
Looked so bare to me.
That's where the house is going.
Yeah, it'll look better with a house.
Any thoughts, Jim?
Yeah, just to confirm, the plan for landscaping within the floodplain would be nothing other than removal of hazard trees?
We're not proposing anything within the floodplain, with the exception of, we have a septic tank very close to it and a cesspool located within it,
Right.
which will be abandoned and filled with clean sand. Other than that, no grading or anything is proposed
Or-
within the flood zone.
Understory removal or anything?
No understory removal either.
And then in the area kind of behind the new septic system, what would be the plan for that area?
Nothing.
Just nothing, okay. That all?
The people that are rebuilding this have actually owned the property for a very long time, and they ended up settling a dispute between family members, and one of the family members got this, and they're very happy to be rebuilding on their old family homestead.
Sounds good.
No concerns at all.
Okay, would someone like to make a motion?
I'll make a motion to approve the RDA for 16 Old York Road for a dwelling and septic system with a -3 determination.
Second?
Second by Jim, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
None opposed? Motion carries.
Please sign, and I will add those conditions to those for your information. Stick. All of them.
Next, we have a request for determination of applicability for 87 Route 28, proposal for a detached garage.
For the record, David Little again, representing Virginia Chamberlain, and at Amy's request, I'm providing you with revised plans.
He's right.
That's not working for our electronic question.
Sorry.
We'll get there.
Well, David, I don't think I sent the email out to Ryder Wilcox until after all of this, we discussed this, that we now are accepting these electronically. As well as we.
We've already submitted and received a negative determination for Virginia Chamberlain. Her property located at 87 Route 28 in Harwich is the large yellow antique. We went before you, we also went before FEMA and obtained permission to bring fill onto her property and elevate the landform in order to bring the large antique house out of the flood zone. This is what it looked like. I don't know if anybody drove by at the time when it was, it was quite an interesting project. Virginia and her contractor found some interesting antiques underneath the old home that just had a dirt crawl space, some keepsakes that she's very happy to have. So that being said, Amy asked me to update the topography on the plan so you could see how the grades have been raised. The site has not been loamed yet, so I anticipate the grades will still come up another 6 inches. And off to the west of the dwelling, Virginia would like to build a 3-car garage, and we are showing the location of that, where it's proposed to go. Again, it's in the flood zone that was recently mapped as an AE zone in 2014. We are right at the outer fringe of the flood zone. We did receive permission from FEMA to do this work. So I think it's fair to say we're not obstructing floodwaters or creating a hazard to any neighbors with this work, and we're hopeful that you would grant us another negative determination for the garage.
So David, the proposed topography would be what was on the previous plan, because you are bringing the grade up from about elevation 6, 7-ish to 11.
And there is still more proposed grading going to happen over
From
by
the
the
old
garage.
plan, right.
Yes, per the old plan. It has not been completed yet. But I did show you what's been
Yep.
done on the site to date.
I appreciate that, thank you. So we went out to the site today, and the commission had some questions about, the location and being close to a property line, if this was gonna have an adverse impact to abutting properties, and somebody pointed out too, there's, everywhere else is lower, so, this shouldn't have an adverse impact to abutting properties, because this is already, without a structure on it, higher than what's around it. So, with our normal conditions that regarding runoff and whatnot, I can recommend approval of this. Probably reference the other site plan too, in terms of what the topography on the site should be when all is said and done.
And I will be preparing a final as-built for FEMA
Great.
when it's all done, and I'll certainly supply the commission with a
Please.
copy of that.
Please.
Thanks, Amy. Any comments? Apologies?
No.
Dave, I'm just trying to picture this, so you're raising where the garage is gonna be like 4 or 5 feet from
Yeah.
what we saw today?
We are, yes.
So the driveway's gonna come in and then kinda,
Well, the whole side of it's going to be gradual, so I don't think from the street it's going to appear out of,
it's not gonna go straight up? but
not at all.
gradual.
Not at all.
I was just curious, okay,
Yeah.
that's all I have.
So just to follow up on that, I'm trying to picture, like you, I'm trying to picture what the end is here. Your anticipated elevation at the top of the driveway in front of the garage is what?
11.
11. You're bringing,
4 or
Oh.
5 feet.
so the whole thing is gonna be higher than it is now, basically, everything around.
Yes, and that's what the original plan that you signed off on with the first RDA showed those grades.
Okay, all right.
Correct. Just to clarify, right, so what we permitted for that whole plateau, if you will, is 11. And what you have out there now, where we were in the driveway today, is currently at 9. And the garage itself is 1.5 to 2 feet below what we were standing on. So it's kind of halfway.
It's
The
gonna
house
come-
is above, but
The garage will become, the grades adjacent to the driveway will go up 2 feet.
Thank you.
Your driveway doesn't attach to your garage.
That's a good point. We will be attaching it to the garage.
Where?
Though, it's a 3-bay garage, and it'll be a gravel driveway that we'll just attach in here.
Okay.
No comments from me.
Okay. Would you like to make a motion? Negative 3, right?
-3.
Put something else, Jim? That's all?
I'll make the motion to approve the RDA for 87 Route 28 for a detached garage with a negative 3 determination.
Okay. Second by John. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Motion carries. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, thanks. Coming around for signature.
While we're doing this, I'll announce the next one, which will be continued.
Yes, if you please,
Sure.
announce it.
Next, we have a notice of intent for 30 Harbor Road, proposal for a pier ramp float and dredging. They have requested a continuance till March 20th, 2019, so I move that we grant continuance.
Second.
Seconded by Jim. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Motion carries.
Okay.
Next, we have a notice of intent for 23 Betty's Lane, proposal for septic and to replace retaining wall with tree removal and plantings.
Thank you.
Evening, Commissioners. Robert Reedy, J.M. O'Reilly Associates, here tonight representing Andrew and Michelle Olson, owners of 23 Betty's Lane in Harwich. Michelle Olson is back in the audience with us tonight. So we've got a couple things we're doing for this project. We were originally brought in to replace a failed septic system. And so once we talked with the client, we realized there was a few other bits of site work that they wanted to do. They've recently purchased the property. And the other things, they wanted to remove some trees, additionally a retaining wall in the back. So just going through one at a time here. The septic system is for an existing two-bedroom dwelling. We're not proposing any change in design flow or alterations to the size of the footprint of the house, anything like that. You may have realized that we submitted a revised plan last week. That's because we're also filing with the Board of Health for the variances needed for the septic system. And after meeting with Megan Eldridge, she let us know that they would be looking for us to revise the plan to a two-bedroom bleaching facility. So that's the revision that we sent out to you last week. As a result of that revision, our leaching facility is no longer within 100 feet of the wetland resource. So the only septic component we have within 100 feet is the septic tank. We did seek to site the septic system, if possible, further over where the existing leach pit is. However, the presence of a leaching catch basin over there made it so that we wouldn't be able to fit one in without getting too close to it or to the drainage pipe connected to it. So we've sited it at maximum feasible distance with that in mind. Additionally, we also are proposing to remove 15 trees. This was primarily because the risk that they pose to the house. A lot of these trees are leaning towards the house. They're in different stages of decay, and I felt this was the right time to remove them. We're offering mitigation of planting 6 trees to replace these trees, 3 American hollies, 2 eastern red cedars, and flowering dogwood, all to replace the 6 trees that are being removed within the 50-foot buffer. Additionally, we're proposing a row of 10 sweet pepper bushes that would be running along the slope there. Additionally, we're doing a bit of site work in the back there. When you visited the site today, you may have seen some of the retaining walls that are back there. There's 3 tiers of retaining wall that are split down the middle with some steps at grade. And the lower 2 tiers of retaining wall we're proposing to remove. Just to make it clear, if there's the orange rows right there, those are the 2 remote rows of retaining wall that would be removed. And then this red row on the top here, the uppermost retaining wall, we'd be looking to combine that and replace it as one retaining wall that would run all the way across. All of these walls are old and are in need of replacement. And in the case of the lower walls, they're not really serving a structural purpose anymore. They've kind of sloughed over to the side, and we're simply going to remove them in those cases. In addition to the top retaining wall that's to be removed and replaced, we're also going to be removing the landing and stairs that are currently in that location. And instead, we would be putting a landing and stairs over to the left as you look at it on the plan, just to provide a new access for a deteriorating stairway. There is some minor remodeling happening inside the house. However, there's no change of footprint, no change in design flow as a result of that, but just wanted to make you aware that is why we submitted proposed plans.
Thank you.
I believe we have anything else to add.
Any comments, Amy?
The trees that are slated to come down, most of them are very close to the house and leaning towards the house, so I would agree with that. It's a very vegetated, wooded lot. It's nice that it was kept in a natural condition. And so I appreciate that trees are going back and not just shrubs. We don't often see that, so that's very nice to see. As far as the retaining walls, they're pretty dilapidated. The bottom ones are completely rotted away, and the slope is not so severe that it even needs any. So I think just removing the bottom and combining the top into one will be sufficient to hold the slope, as well as provide more of a naturalized buffer in the backyard towards the wetland. And the wetland is a active cranberry bog owned by the Gingras family. It is a regulatable wetland. This home is not associated with the bog operations. So with that, and I would recommend approval of this project. And did we get a DEP number yet for this one?
I believe I have it in the file here, yeah.
Oh, we did. We did.
Okay, perfect.
372. So yes, we can close that if we see fit.
Amy, I didn't make it to the site, so I guess I'm unclear. Is there any new activity, the 0 to 50, in this project? None.
Well, so essentially, there is the proposed landing and stairs. So there's, what he was saying was swapping one out for the other, essentially. There's actually a reduction in the 0 to 50 because the retaining walls are being combined.
Let's go around. Paula, any comments?
Nothing, no.
No comment.
Very
Is this-
straightforward.
Michelle's just pointing out, I do show a 3-foot tall dog fence in the backyard as well.
I was just
I
gonna
did
ask
not
you
see
about that.
that.
And that
Sorry about that, I neglected to mention that on my
that
to-do
appears
list
to be
there.
new to me.
Yes, it is.
So I am concerned about a fence, which we consider a structure,
Yeah, that is new.
within the 50-foot buffer zone.
The intent is for it to be 3 feet tall. The idea is to hold in a dog, just to give you an idea of what we're looking at.
Yeah, height is the issue.
What would the material be for the fence?
And I assume the fence would go all the way down to the ground?
The fence, there would be stakes going in, and it was to go.
If you could come to the microphone, please.
Sorry about that. Yes, the intent is a 3-foot fence out of cedar with posts, and it would go, it wouldn't be into the ground, it would be at.
It would not have space below it for critters to scoot
No, the
on.
point is to keep in some small dogs, yes.
Yeah, and keep critters out.
Yes, exactly. And the thought was that we would be removing a lot of the wood down in the 50-foot area, and we would be actually replacing it with much less wood in the ground. We would be just putting in the fence, was the idea.
I apologize. That wasn't something that I picked up on in the application. So it is a variance request.
That's, have they asked for a variance, or?
I have to look.
I don't believe we specifically did.
We do call out in our regulations fences, and in the 0 to 50 foot, we don't allow new structures and fences, no matter what their height, are considered structures. So typically, fences that we do allow would be kind of counterproductive to your quest of keeping a dog in, because they would require space underneath for critters to get in and out, especially in the 50-foot no disturb zone. So. It is, I mean, it is a regulatable wetland, even though it is an active cranberry bog, so it's a little bit different than, you know, it's a much more cultivated, manicured, but it is, but the buffer zone is very natural in that area as well.
Well, let's come back to that one issue, but we'll first see if there's any other comments. Carolyn, any other
No,
comments?
that was my
Yeah.
question on the fence.
Jim, any comments?
Yeah, I could see the fence being an issue. Would it be on top of the retaining wall or just below the retaining wall in that
Well,
area?
the way it's in the plan now, there are 3 levels of retaining wall, and we would be taking out the lower 2,
Yep.
and the fence would be pretty much where the the middle tier was.
So to answer your question, below that top retaining wall,
Yeah.
that middle tier.
Yeah, just a little bit below. You know, in my view anyway, the biggest problem with the fence is probably on the, I guess it's the east side of the property where it jogs around what should really be a natural mitigation area. You know, being in the area where the retaining wall is not a big deal to me anyway.
Where? I think as it
Bring it
was
up.
drawn in the plan, it comes to the point where the retaining wall ends. That was its intention. There's a large tree there that we had flagged to come out because it was the tree that pushed the retaining wall out. And I believe the fence is on the inside of that. So it is on the inside of the current retaining wall,
Okay.
if that's what the question is.
Well, yeah, the fences are for the regulations for free movement of wildlife, so it's an issue to be close to the wetland like that. So in that area where it's, you know, to me, it doesn't matter much from the retaining wall upwards because that's not really a wildlife area, but in that corner, that is.
Oh, so the fact that it jogs out from the house, is
Yeah.
that the issue?
Well,
we,
he's also talking that this one versus this one.
He's talking about
So
how
he's
it
saying if
comes
the
out farther than
fence
that
ran along this top retaining wall,
top retaining
they
wall.
would view that as more of a, this is already a developed area and it wouldn't be impeding wildlife in the same way as if the fence runs along this middle one.
I see.
I have a question that might be able to, or a point that might be able to give you some area. In addition to maybe being along the top of the proposed retaining wall here, you do have room in the 50 to 100 foot buffer zone on the side yard that could potentially, the commission could also potentially look at. In addition to, like, if you didn't get as much
over here.
in the back, yeah.
I see. Yeah, the issue is the slope there.
Yeah.
That's the hard thing is to fence where there's a significant slope, and that side of the house happens to be at a more significant slope. And we were hoping to get sort of a flat enclosed area where the dogs could just go out of the door that's there.
Yeah. Well, you could still go out the door that was there, but instead of, it could wrap around the side of the house potentially too.
I see.
Instead of going out as, like, past the retaining wall, that's all I'm saying. If that's
So-
gonna make it more, in line with our regulations.
Okay.
Yeah, that's my own personal thought, to keep it in line with the top of the retaining wall there, but have it be able to extend up the side of the property too, to allow a little bit more room.
So you're proposing just run it as is, but along the top as opposed to the middle tier, and then
That's up to the, yeah.
and then extend beyond into the 50 to 100 foot buffer if necessary. I see. Yeah, that would work as well.
I don't know if that's something that the commission would consider, but.
Well, I guess we could work around that. The thought was that the fencing would, the way it is structured now, you would have to sort of open a fence to get onto the landing, to go down the stairs, which makes it awkward. The property is for my mother, who is in her 70s now, trying to make the flow as easy as possible for her.
It's just to the commission.
My other comment was as to the ground cover and the area that's going to be disturbed around the retaining walls. Is there a plan for that?
Well, we are showing a row of sweet pepper bush that we're intending to plant there in order to help stabilize any slope issues there. And beyond that, we would just be returning the area to natural conditions.
And below the retaining wall, there'd probably be some disturbed area.
Yeah, there's a retaining wall above and below those two sweet pepper bush, so we would be just returning them to natural condition. Loam and seed is necessary, using only approvable seeds from the
So
commission's.
it would be some native grass seed or wildflower seed or something like that. Okay. And then the other thing would be as to coming into compliance with the fertilizer and chemical regulations. Those are my comments.
Overall, everything you're suggesting makes very good sense, I think. I do agree with Amy's suggestion about the fence, staying to the uphill side of the retaining wall. I think that may cover a multitude of sins. Hopefully we'll achieve what you're after ultimately.
Thanks, Mark. So does that sound agreeable to have that modification for the fence?
We can live with that.
Yeah, it's a pretty,
I'm a little confused as to what the modification is,
So
where the line would be.
what I was intending to suggest was that the closest point to the wetland would be where the retaining wall is, the new retaining wall, and then extending to the east side of the building, outside of the 50-foot buffer, so where this kind of meets with the building here, you could extend it a little bit farther out into around the side of the house, to allow a little bit more room for the dogs, which is an existing disturbed area. It's just Cape Cod lawn there right now.
Sure, where the new retaining wall is going.
and how about on the west side, Amy?
So,
Have
so
it-
right here
It's
is
the slope
retaining
is,
wall.
it's very heavily vegetated, more so on that side. It's a
Oh,
little
I
bit
see
more
that little
open on
teeny
the
line
east
next to
side.
those bushes. That's not moving it much. So, as I'm looking at this, Amy, then that fence would still be 15 feet into the 0 to 50?
But it would sit on the retaining wall, right?
Yeah, but it wouldn't be any farther into the 0 to 50 than what's existing. I'm happy to work, meet with you and show a plan too about it.
The fence would be on top of the retaining wall?
The top tier.
Yep.
The top
Yeah.
tier
I think what we're
retaining wall.
talking
Yeah.
about, right?
Which is within the 50,
Well
Within the 50.
It's in with the 50, but it's also on top of a structure that exists presently.
Right, and there's
And
more
and it's
structures.
getting replaced as,
Right.
that's our
Right,
goal as
so-
well, is to replace that wall.
I mean, we've been fairly consistent about fences in the 0 to 50, and the few variances I can recall that had to been a space for wildlife.
Right.
And so there haven't been very many variances for this, but in this case, if it's gonna sit on top of the existing structure for most of the footprint, it seems reasonable. It would connect from the retaining wall right to the 50 line, getting to the 50 to 100, which is okay, I think. And then on the west side, I think it would come straight up. And, some portion of it would be new structure in the 50, but,
Still not sure where
But
this
you're losing
retaining
other
wall is.
existing retaining wall.
I don't know if this helps at all, the red line on this plan here is
That's
the
what I'm
retaining wall we're
thinking,
talking
well,
about.
that's farther out than the
Okay.
dog run.
do you mind
I can
showing it
bring
to
that over.
Carolyn?
Yes,
Oh,
but
no,
it's-
the dog
We
run
could-
is here. Oh, is that the
No,
limit of work?
No, the dog run, it looks to me like the retaining wall is farther out than the dog run.
Yeah, it's
Okay.
easier- it might be easier when it's bigger here. So this is how it was proposed, and so this is the current retaining wall. Well, there will be three
Which is-
tiers. This is the very tall one that stands 30 inches tall, and then this is 18
this is
inches
what we
tall,
want
and this is
down.
about a foot
This is
tall.
the
So
existing,
these two would
this is the
become
proposed
Pay
retaining wall.
right
attention
here.
to
It's
the
itself.
So the fence would come, instead of the fence going all the way down here, it would come across,
And then come back,
and
I
then
think
go
it's
out
just
here,
as
and then
a-
out,
west.
and then maybe up to here.
So they have a little slide on that side, and that's between.
Yeah.
There'd be a small
Yep.
piece that would still be.
Yeah, so
did
this
Jim
is the piece
say
that would be in
we're
the 50
reducing it to the edge of the house?
thing, but there's currently retaining wall here.
The top retaining wall, which is.
So
No,
the
that
plan could
there-
be revised to reflect
It's
that.
actually farther.
Yeah, just, as long as we
Yeah,
have some
not
sort of a
as bad.
consensus of
Yeah.
what's
I
wanted.
was
and-
thinking you could even go as
I
far
did-
as the front
Plan's a
corner of
little
the house.
small.
Side.
I know,
I just wanna
and when you put
clarify,
it on
do we
this,
say on the west side it's
pull it up,
gonna
I can't even read it.
Yeah.
go to the end of the house, so it's moving in?
I
I know the
wouldn't-
retaining wall, that I'm clear with, but right now it's showing
It goes out from,
out, which is what Jim was talking about.
that's up to you.
Now, where
I
we-
think they're
I'm-
removing some retaining wall on that side anyways, so.
No, I'm just trying to clarify what's
Yeah,
being
well-
proposed.
Yeah, let me-
The western edge of,
That's what's
I can
currently
sketch
proposed.
something
It bumps
out.
about 8 feet off of the edge, like you see.
So currently, this is the retaining wall
right,
that
no, I
extends there.
understand that.
And yes, and then, right now, it's proposed to have, it come slightly out beyond the house. There's some shrubbery here that
Isn't-
we're hoping to enclose.
I was looking
And then on this side is where Amy was
Right.
suggesting
No,
that we.
that I-
Yeah, you got that, okay.
Jim, were you suggesting that that be moved into the edge of the house on the west?
On the
That's what
west-
I'm looking at, that
no,
jog.
No, I wasn't suggesting
Oh,
that,
okay.
no.
I'm all set.
Haven't we required people who have fences that go all the way down to the ground to raise the fence
We have,
previously?
normally we do, it's, especially in the 0 to 50, seeing as how it's gonna be on this retaining wall is not gonna be as low as what's currently out there now, cause you're combining the retaining walls. I see that as much of a buffer as a fence, so, while normally we would require that separation because it's already on top of a wall, pretty much, I don't,
How far above ground will the wall extend?
It's about 30 inches.
30, it's about a 30-inch wall currently, and we're
You
not in.
mean from the top to the bottom side of the retaining wall?
From the top of the highest grade, the retaining wall has a low grade down here, comes
Sure.
up, and then from the higher grade, how high will that retaining wall be? Or
Oh, it's
will
just
it be?
right at grade.
It's
It
at
will be grade
Yeah,
level.
it's at grade.
So this fence is actually,
I mean, it is right around the foundation of the house too, it's, so, as far as wildlife passage, I think there's other adequate wildlife passage around the retaining wall and this small portion of fence. That's, so if we can agree to not extend any farther out past the retaining wall, then I think we've met the intent.
I think in the absence of the wall, it would be very difficult to approve it as a new fence coming through the 0 to 50, but with a wall there, I don't
Yeah.
see a large, infraction, what we're trying to protect. You've got a little piece to the west, but also they're removing 2 chunks of retaining wall as it is, so I think it's reasonable. Any other comments or thoughts on this that you might want to condition?
I just if you don't mind, I'd recommend that we see you can send it to me electronically, a plan change, within the next week, so that if we are to move on the project, that we'll see that ahead of time.
Certainly.
So we'll need to act on the variance request as well, even though it resolved
Yeah,
most of the concerns.
that's okay, we can, as long as we acknowledge it here now that it is a variance, I think we're good.
Okay. All right, does somebody want to tackle that motion?
Make a motion to approve the notice of intent for 23 Betty's Lane, septic retaining wall, tree removal and planting, with a variance to build a fence as noted, and the condition of no fertilizers or chemicals to be used on the lawn in perpetuity.
Second, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Motion carries. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, so, if you can get that to me in the next week, that would be great. You can send it to me electronically, we'll verify, then we make 2 copies. And then in 2 weeks, we officially sign the conditions. Okay? One more time, if anybody's in the room that hasn't signed it in the back, can you please do so?
Okay, next we have a notice of intent for 7 Great Woods Road, removal of parking area, installation of a walkway with beach modifications.
evening. For the record, Sean Riley, Coastal Engineering,
Green Higgins from Wilkinson Ecological Design.
representing the applicant for this after-the-fact filing. Attorney Mike Ford is representing the Great Woods LLC on their behalf. Just
Yeah, so, Mr. Chairman, members of the commission, I'm here, the property owner couldn't be here, the representative of the LLC, and I've been retained to be here. They felt it was important, given the nature of this request, that a representative of the property owner was here. And so I'm here for that purpose, that limited purpose.
Thanks, Mike. I have to say, I'm not used to an after-the-fact filing where someone's self-reporting and coming in on their own to report on themselves. Usually we're coming in with flak jackets after they've gone and done something they shouldn't have done. This property was purchased in September of 2017 by Great Woods LLC. They brought on a property management company, Home Watch, who they worked with for 18 years on other properties, brought them in to manage this property with the expectation, as they should, of a property management company that all the permits were obtained for the work, whether it be a building permit, conservation permit, hiring licensed plumbers, electricians to perform any of the work on the property. We reviewed the file, and it was unusual. We couldn't find anything within the file of any record for this property, 7 Great Woods, that anything was permitted for construction. It was brought to my attention maybe a week or so ago that Amy found the original application within 9 Great Woods. It was actually filed under 9. This property was subdivided from 9 in 1996. And I just want to hand out a brief property history so we can follow along with all the events.
Yes. Yep, but it was, originally it was one lot that got subdivided, yes. Here you go. Thank you for this is handy in this project.
Yep. So we were brought in last year. It started with the new property management company, maintenance organization. Mark Dorfman is here as a representative of the new company. Once the applicant found that the appropriate permits were not sought from the prior management company, he immediately fired them, had them leave the site, brought in a new management company, asked advice from that management company of what to do. He enlisted Wilkinson Ecological Design. They brought us on, Mike Ford, to make sure that all the I's are dotted and the T's are crossed. When they purchased this property, they went to the efforts in their due diligence to have it written within the purchase and sales agreement that all permits had been sought on this property, and they've got it written into that agreement. So this homeowner is a real stickler for following the regulations. As you can see, self-reporting on himself for the work that was done. So just to run through the history of the property was subdivided in '96. In 1997, there was a notice of intent that was filed for the construction of the single-family dwelling, septic, and site improvements. Why this is important is that it was brought to our attention when Amy went out to do a site visit that there was additional construction that was done on the site that we were unaware of that was done without permits, and we'll get to that in the timeline. So in 2001, the house was constructed and the site improvements were completed. A certificate of compliance was issued by this commission in 2001, and then there's no documentation of any permitting done from 2001 to present. Looking through the Google Earth aerial photographs, we noted what Amy pointed out to us, a deck expansion and a portion of the driveway that had been converted to lawn. In September of 2017, the property was purchased by Great Woods LLC, who was the current owner. In September of 2017, Home Watch Property Management Company was retained to manage this property. Again, they had worked with this client for a number of years. I'm not sure if you're all familiar with Home Watch or what's happened with the events of Home Watch, but it's been in the papers. Home Watch was sold in 2016. It went downhill very quickly. They walked out, and the former owner came back when he found out that the reputation of his company that he had built up for 28 years had gone down the tubes, and he's actually back trying to rectify the situation of that former property management company. So Home Watch took over the management of this property in 2017. In 2018, they started receiving invoices for work that was unauthorized. So the company was doing work that they had not authorized. They started reviewing the invoices, decided to bring in another property management company to evaluate not only the invoices, but also to make sure that all the applicable permits were in place. That's where Mark Dorfman comes in with Home Maintenance Organization in May of 2018. After reviewing all the invoices and permits, it's realized that they don't have permits, and a lot of the invoices were for things that were unauthorized. So at that point, the client issued a cease and desist of all work through legal counsel and terminated Home Watch's contract. And at that point, it was decided by Home Maintenance Organization to bring in Wilkinson and Coastal Engineering and Attorney Mike Ford. So in September, Wilkinson provided a proposal in August and was retained in September. We were retained in October to do an existing conditions. And since that point, essentially, we've been working with Wilkinson and with Amy to come up with mitigation for the work that's been done out on this property without any permits. So then we filed, not knowing that that plan existed that was under 9 Great Woods, that there actually was a plan. We couldn't really tell what was permitted and what wasn't permitted because we didn't have a plan. Amy went out to the site to review it, and that's when she identified that there were deck additions where the deck boards were being replaced by a carpenter, and where they were being replaced was on a deck that had not shown up on the original site plan. So at that point, Amy made the right choice and told the contractor to cease and desist, alerted us to that information, and so here we are today with the knowledge that there was additional work done by the previous owner on the property without authorization. And with that, I'll let Katrine jump into what she is proposing for mitigation for the work that was done.
Thanks. So to ensure that our proposal really focused on the most appropriate and site-specific solution for this property, we considered probably more than we normally do. We really considered all the different options. We looked at the existing conditions and considered a range of different possibilities given the existing conditions. And this resulted after we kind of really considered everything possible. We came up with 3 project alternative diagrams that each focused on and dealt with the existing conditions in different ways. And we shared these alternatives with Amy when we met with her to get her feedback, which was very helpful. And then we refined what we were calling alternative 2. We refined that and developed the preferred alternative, which is the plan that we've provided you. Project alternatives, alternative 2, preferred alternative. And that's the plan diagram that we've submitted. In addition to that, we provided you with a project overview document, that handout, a 2-page handout that describes the existing conditions. And it's really important to point out that on this property, particularly on the pond edge, we have a really healthy vegetated woodland buffer. It consists of cherries, clethra, fern, different ferns, crinkle hairgrass, and really mature, beautiful red maples and tupelos. Bigger trees than and beech trees also are on the property, bigger trees than what you normally see in this area of the Cape. And in addition to the native plant community, there's also invasive and non-native species that are existing on the property, including Asiatic bittersweet, burning bush, porcelain berry, and shrub honeysuckle. So there really is an opportunity here. This project has an opportunity to improve the existing habitat that's available for wildlife, and also to improve stormwater function of the property to allow for infiltration in these areas. And that's all focused on establishing a stronger native plant community than there is currently on this site. So just looking at our plan a bit.
Let me
yeah.
just stop you there for
Yeah.
a second. I know it's going to be very helpful for you guys to understand exactly what was done before she gets into the mitigation, so let me just walk you through exactly what's been done. If I can, do I reach? No, maybe not. You can probably hear me.
Pull that closer.
So what we've identified that was done prior to this owner was additions to the deck in the rear of the house, walkways, and patio and walkways in the front of the house. Under the prior property owner, property management company, this walkway was added down the slope to get to the beach. But the biggest thing that they did without authorization is to put kind of a rock revetment right along the edge of the beach. So that, to us is egregious, and we're looking for the best solution to rectify that as well. So she's come up with several options to restore that back to its original condition, and I'll let her discuss what those options are.
If I can jump in for just a second, how about tree removal in the 0 to 50 below the house towards the pond? It seems like there was a lot removed there. Was that authorized?
So we went back and we looked at the aerial photographs. If you're talking in this area here, if you go back and look through the aerial photographs, it seemed like those trees were taken down as part of the original work under the limit of work, and then just maintained. So we tried to find what the so this is the original site plan. It shows the building. It shows a driveway, and you'll notice that we did the plan in 1997. I had no idea we'd done it. I wasn't here then. But the limit of work for that plan is out at about where the limit of clearing is of those trees. I don't know if you saw anything different from that. But essentially, the deck was added on this side and along the front side of the screen porch. This driveway had been removed as part of, after 2001, prior to the purchase of the property in 2017. The driveway was removed and replaced with lawn. But to answer your question, I don't know that they were doing any more clearing.
We actually, that was probably the first place we went when we first went to the site to see if, and we did not see any fresh cuttings or any fresh stumps along that.
Right, yeah, I'm not expecting fresh, but I'm just wondering if it was authorized. It seems like a lot of clearing in 0 to 50. Maybe back then that would have been allowed, but quite a few trees would have been removed because the house footprint is right on the 50 line.
Right. There was about, it's hard to tell because what was permitted as the deck back then is not what's there right now. It was, oh, that's an older plan. There were also several renditions of this other plan. There we go. It was at least 12 feet past the deck that was on the approved limit of work with no replanting noted in 2000. So it was originally permitted in 1997, and then a certificate of compliance issued in 2001.
All right, thanks. In a minute, we'll call on the audience.
So just to go through our plan and the different, you'll see that there's different colors identified with some explanation of what we're proposing in those different areas to address what Sean just mentioned. First, the darker green area that's surrounding that, pretty much surrounding the house, and a lot of that was probably within that original limit of work that you mentioned, Amy. That currently lacks an understory, so we would like to, it's right along that woodland edge, and we would like to plant appropriate native species in this area, such as the black huckleberry, black chokeberry, and Carolina rose, to list a few. The rose would be in more of the sunnier areas within that zone. And then we would also propose planting herbaceous species like crinkle hairgrass and Pennsylvania sedge in that area. Then secondly, for the beach area, which is visible, we've provided some historic photos, and you can see that in those photos, as far back as 1938, that beach area is existing. So we're proposing to remove that riprap that Sean mentioned along that edge of the pond edge there. We have a photo here if anyone.
Let her pass them around.
Yeah, sure. We're proposing to remove that riprap in order to restore a more naturalized and gradual edge of the pond. In order, and this is really, we were really thinking about on either side of this beach area, there's really nice, mature, on one side there's some red maples, and then the other side we have a tupelo grove. So we're really considering how we could make this area more naturalized but still protect those trees from erosion. And so we're proposing to install biodegradable coir fiber rolls, which you can see in that light brown line on our plan. And that would also, so right along the edge, that would be a fiber roll, and then that would progress into a sand-filled coir envelope that would maintain the stability in the area once the riprap was removed. And in terms of alternatives, this is where we really thought of different ways of addressing this. We considered leaving portions of the riprap closest to the edge of the water, and in talking to Amy, we were talking these options, and that would be in order to protect those trees. We considered also a way to disperse some of those rocks that are existing there now and cover them up with sand to maintain that stability along that edge. But then in the end, and through our conversation with Amy, we determined that providing a solution that is biodegradable and will allow for a more naturalized edge to the pond made the most sense, and especially for that beach area that had been here since at least the 1930s. So the fiber rolls that we're proposing, coir envelope, which would just be one layer of one 20-inch fiber roll along that edge, and any needed sand nourishment, which would be only very likely just a thin covering on an as-needed basis. That all would be planted with native grass species such as fox sedge that could handle would do really well there along the water, along the pond. And then lastly, just to take you a little closer to the house in that light green area on the eastern side of the house, this is the area that contains the highest amount of invasive and non-native species on the property. It's a sloping area, and it contains the bittersweet, the burning bush, porcelainberry, and shrub honeysuckle that I mentioned earlier. So we'd be proposing to remove all of that vegetation, keep any native vegetation that would be in there, and where feasible, we'd be proposing to mechanically remove this, so there is good access along the lawn area and the driveway. And anywhere that was more sensitive, we would be just doing the work by hand. We would remove the vegetation, immediately seed it with a native seed mix appropriate for the area, and we would use blanketing, the erosion control blanketing, to immediately stabilize the sloping area. And then we would propose to plant that area as specified on our plan, things like high bush blueberry, low bush blueberry, Carolina rose, sweet pepper bush, all things that would be appropriate for the conditions in that area. Overall, with this invasive removal area, along with the replanting area of that dark green area I mentioned, we're focusing this mitigation on about 4,000 square feet, proposing about 75 native shrubs and countless grasses and herbaceous species to be planted. And this is really in an effort to mitigate for the construction activities that Sean mentioned, And we have a great opportunity here to enhance this, to provide a more enhanced vegetated buffer to help with stormwater function and also provide some better habitat for wildlife in the area. And with that, we're interested to hear your thoughts.
Thank you. Amy, what do you have for us?
So in addition, actually, in my site summary, I created a little timeline, not as nice as yours, but it actually pretty closely mirrors that, so that's good. Same things. The only thing I would add is it's really hard to tell from Google Earth photos about the deck when that went in. By my best estimate, from what I could tell out there, it was around 2004, 2005.
Yep.
So that comes into play when we talk about when we had a 50-foot no disturb zone, and that came in right in the early 2000s as well. So the deck in its current configuration is a little closer to the pond than what we originally approved and larger. It's still right at that 50-foot line, not really so much into it. If it was to be proposed today, we now have a 50 or 60-foot no new structure regulation, so it doesn't abide by today's. But back then, would we have? So what they're proposing now is, I think it's important to get it on record that this is what's out there. And I do view the mitigation, the replanting on the slope, the invasive removal and the replanting as mitigation for the additional square footage of the deck. And I don't know exactly what that, it's about twice the size as it was originally approved, guessing. But 4,000 square feet, I think, makes up for that. And where the deck was, the larger deck was constructed, was within the limit of work for the house as it was. The path, it's pretty formal. We do allow an access in most occasions down to the pond. We want people to access their ponds if they live on the water. Whether or not we would have granted quite as much of the kind of terracing and the little landing is up for interpretation. But again, you offered some mitigation for that. I think all of those things are fairly benign compared to the rocks that were put there, right across the frontage, essentially. I visited this property when I first started here. I know the rocks weren't there then, so. Since we went out to the site again today, and some members brought up some very good points, and I'll let them speak to it a little bit more. But as I was thinking about it after we went to the site visit today, is there even another potential alternative here to still allow beach access, protect the trees, but to get some more stability to that pond frontage there without having to use an engineered solution like a sand envelope or fiber rolls or whatnot? And one of the things that I'd maybe ask you as professionals in this is, instead of the sand envelopes, if you were to bring in a little bit of fill and really plant that heavily to create what Jim was saying is a more naturally vegetated pond edge while still allowing some beach area, would that be very similar to the stability that sand envelopes would provide? So.
Thanks, Amy. I'm going to go around the table first, but I do want to just make one point to all the commissioners that I personally feel that the mitigation of the invasive plants in the 50 to 100 is not an appropriate mitigation for these structural impacts in the 0 to 50. I feel pretty strongly about that, but I want to just have everyone think about that concept as you give your comments. So, Paul, if you want to start.
Yeah, I did go to the site today. Unfortunately, having just had a hip replaced, I couldn't go down onto the beach, but seeing the pictures has set in my mind about the rock revetment. And if you take those rocks out and don't put in the core fiber, would that be stabilized enough? Or with plantings, like Amy said, would that work?
I don't mean right at the water's
No.
edge. I mean, essentially, in a similar configuration to what you've proposed for rolls. Or maybe somewhat reduced, not right along the pond edge.
Maybe that was not fair of me to ask
Sorry.
without you
Bringing
really
this-
having a chance to look at it.
That's just a thought, it may not be everyone's thought,
Slope further out and then blanketing it.
Yeah.
And then plugging.
just a thought.
So that it
I
could
think
be
it-
an
I think it could be.
alternative.
Just be less of an engineer's thought.
Go ahead.
I'm gonna pass for now.
Okay, so honestly, I couldn't follow your parts of your initial description of the timeline. And I guess one of the things that stood out to me about that was specifically that apparently last summer, when you ran in, or the owner, whoever the owner is, this Great Woods LLC, discovered somehow that their management company was doing work without any authorization on the property, that they stopped all work, but then somehow in February, there was still work going on, and Amy came across and had to once again put a stop to, that the management company didn't know anything about? Did I get that straight?
So the previous management company, Home Watch,
Yeah.
had done work last year up until May of last year. When they were let go, then Home Maintenance Organization, Mark Dorfman was brought on, and under his watch, that's when they started replacing the deck boards. Mark, if you'd like to speak to that, we had asked him about the permits and to make sure that he had gotten those permits, and he can discuss what he went through to obtain the permits. He went to the building department, talked to them, to obtain the permits. There wasn't any discussion at that point about needing conservation's approval, because it was all done on top of the existing structure. So,
We didn't know that existing structure was in violation at the time, I didn't see it,
So when we, good evening.
Identify yourself, please.
Mark Dorfman, from the Home Maintenance Organization. So the builder currently doing the work there is Peter Campbell, and he spoke to he pulled all necessary permits because we're putting on a new roof. There was a lot of rotted siding. There were a few other structural issues, and he pulled the necessary building permit. And then we found that while walking on the deck, that there were some deck boards that were rotted, and it really wasn't structurally safe. And the Great Woods LLC has a family, and they were afraid something was going to fall through. So the only deck work we've been doing is removing the rotted and replacing the rotted. Nothing, we're not making it bigger, larger, smaller, or whatever. So.
but it did require, just to, if I can expand on that, because the deck that was illegally built to begin with was of a certain height that it really needed cross-member support, so that's what our building commissioner, when we found all this out, I ran it by him, and he was in touch with them to make sure that there's proper structural cross-bracing supports to that deck structure, because some of it is pretty high.
So Amy, just to clarify, when there's work being done inside the 100-foot buffer, the building department doesn't necessarily send people to the conservation, to you, to pull permits?
When a building permit application comes into the building department, it gets routed through all of us. Conservation is the first stop. I don't know why, typically, and I spoke with the builder, Peter Campbell, and I said, if we're replacing siding, roofing, or redoing a roof, this close to the water, we typically like to see an administrative review permit one-page form, because it is within conservation jurisdiction. But if it was on an existing structure, it may not have been flagged as such. So, I can't, other than that, I can't really, but we didn't know, we weren't aware of any deck work.
Commissioner Ketchum, let me just add that there's no question in my mind that needed conservation approval as well. So here we are, we got an owner that stops everything last May, tries to get some professionals in, we start to put together a plan, and unfortunately, in repairing the roof and the siding and seeing the decking, a natural extension, the building inspector knew, but it clearly, and we're not suggesting in any way it didn't, that needed conservation as well. So that simply compounded things before we got here tonight. So,
Okay, all right.
no suggestion that you didn't have jurisdiction, you did.
Okay, so my other question is, along similar lines, is the nature of the other work, which appears to be pretty new, which is the revetment and the nicely landscaped timbered steps down there, which all looks very nice and all seems to be pretty new. Do I take it correctly that that was done since the current owner took possession of the property?
Yes. So
And
that,
all that work was done without consulting the owner themselves?
so the, and again, I'm speaking through the consultant, the property management company. You're only seeing a portion of the work that he was directed to do. There was I saw 26 pages of invoices. Actually, he's got them with him. So that wasn't the only work that was being requested, or the only work that was being done on the property. There was work on both of the houses, 7, they own 9 as well, so 7 and 9. So there's a laundry list of things that they did, but there's also a laundry list of things that they didn't ask for. They did not ask for the rock revetment to be installed, so that was put in unauthorized. They put it in.
Who put it in?
Under Home Watch.
Why would they do that without owner authors? I mean,
Yeah, we really don't know, Amy,
Yeah.
Unfortunately, and I've just gotten into this in terms of the family. But you raise a good point, and in my inquiring of the LLC, I have been advised that the owner was very ill during this period of time and was not at the site for most of that period of time. And when he did come and find out and see what had been done, that's when he got a hold of his Boston counsel, and that group was fired and let go, and then immediately there was an investigation, and obviously the professionals that he hired advised him, you got to get to conservation. All of this is under their jurisdiction. So that's how it started, and we got here.
And there are newspaper articles
yes.
describing other situations that happen with Home Watch.
I mean, it's good that.
I
that's
could,
no
just
law.
to clarify that, just to reinforce, I'll actually pass out the article that discusses.
Thank you. Yeah, I
Can
mean, it's good that
It's
it's
very
no
unusual
longer.
that they would do unauthorized work, but you can see by the article that this isn't the only client that
This happened to.
just happened to.
Just going back to what John was just saying, you said some of the things were done unauthorized, but some of the things were, when you were talking about the steps and the landing, you said some of the things were requested. So now I'm getting more confused as to.
So, I know that they were, Mark, you can speak to this, they had doors replaced, they had interior floors replaced, they had windows replaced, they had the roofing done, they had a collection, hundreds of thousands of dollars worth.
They requested.
That they requested.
But John was talking about the stairs and the landings and the,
So-
that were recently done.
What, in this situation, what happened is that when the Great Woods LLC purchased the property back in 2017, they had to redo some of the houses of what was going on, and Home Watch was doing that. But in the meantime, during the year of 2000, this past 2017, 2018, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars were spent. But, so they were doing things just thinking in their own mind that they're doing the right thing without saying, oh, should we do this? So, it's someone taking it into their own initiative. And then what happened was when the homeowner actually got down there and saw what was going on, he called us up because we work for the family in Brookline. And the minute I walked in is the minute I called the necessary people and said, you really, you need to abide by the rules. And he agreed totally. And then that's when we let Home Watch go. We went in there, we did not do anything other than put it back together. You know, so it's, what they did was crazy.
Okay. Carolyn, any comments?
No.
Yeah, I'd just like to speak to the getting rid of the revetment, basically. And I do really like the idea of, rather than engineering that with a sand envelope and the fiber rolls, of trying to engineer it with plants, essentially, in a similar manner as you have laid out. And you could actually create a bit of a buffer as far as the whole flow of water down the hill, catch some of that, would actually help with erosion in that area. So I don't know what it would be, maybe something like a 10-foot planted area in a semicircle around there with just the pathway leading into it. It'd be a little bit of a different arrangement, but still create a nice beach and get rid of the revetment.
I would agree with what Jim pointed out. I think that's a very good solution. The dispute between the owner and the prior company is really of no interest to me. That's up to somebody else to argue about. I'm much more concerned about bringing resolution, and all things being equal, the most important thing is to not do any more damage to what's already there, and just go forward. To me, the more mitigation, the better.
Thank you, Mark. Carolyn, any comments?
If considering the planting around the edge, as we've described, what would you propose to do with the revetment that's there?
The way I'm proposing is very similar to what they have shown, which is essentially just the beach sloping into the pond.
Right.
So a similar slope, similar scenario, just using plants instead of the engineered solutions. And maybe there needs to be some sort of help for the plants right along the edge that would have to be come up with.
We're just saying
But-
blanketing it and then
Right.
plugging it.
Right, yeah.
Are you on alternative 2?
Yes, so this,
And are you still proposing the fiber roll return along the edge to protect the trees?
no, that's what we were just discussing.
You're taking those out?
Yeah. But they're saying they might need some matting to help the plants establish.
Yeah, we definitely need some,
Yeah.
Biodegradable.
yeah.
Do you have anything else, Carolyn? John?
I have a question about whether there's any documentary evidence of a similar quality as the photo you just sent around of the revetment, of the conditions prior to the revetment being installed.
We had asked if there was any prior documentation, but the owner had just purchased a property in 2017, September of 2017, and then eventually this thing happened the following spring. So,
I'm
My
familiar with-
recollection, oh, go ahead.
Sorry, I was gonna say, I'm familiar with the property going back quite a ways, and it was always a soft slope with just stones from the water, which you see a lot on that side of Long Pond.
Yeah.
And it was just stones built up, not a revetment, but just
Cobble.
individuals grabbing cobble to put up there. So
That's
that
what I
was,
remember too.
going back to the 1960s, that was at that property.
so again, restoring that same, it looks like they piled up the rocks and then built up behind it.
Yeah, they built a revetment where
Right.
they just took it to a different level.
Right.
No. Those are, the rocks that are there, most were brought in, it looks
Yeah.
like. I mean, the cobble that used to be there was small compared to.
So we'd be looking to remove all that
Yeah.
and restore that.
Right. Right.
And I think there might be, we can look at that alternative that I'm hearing, and that might address your concern about, it would allow for more planting within the 0 to 50, because you had expressed concern that the mitigation's in the 50 to 100, and that was really the area that has the most invasives. But if we are able to maybe plant around that existing kayak rack, closer to
towards the shed.
Yeah, to the shed, there might be a way of getting more mitigation in the 0 to 50.
Yeah, to me, it's apples and oranges to have that large footprint of mitigation of 50 to 100 for the
Yep.
infractions that occurred, so I really strongly don't support that. I'm gonna come back to that in a minute, but I guess I'll take any comments from the audience.
Hi, I'm Ron Anderson. I live at 10 Great Woods. And I've got some questions, my wife Diana, on irrigation, pesticides, and herbicides, and what's the ruling for the 50-foot and 100-foot zones.
We have new bylaws. Do you want to summarize them? quick,
Sure,
Amy?
new regulations. We do not, when projects come back in front of us, we have the opportunity to bring them into compliance with today's regulations. Without a variance, and we really don't grant them, we do not allow chemical application within the 100-foot buffer zone. So that would include pesticides, herbicides, fungicides, like
Okay,
all
what
that.
about irrigation?
Typically, and the commission can correct me if I'm wrong, if it's currently existing and has been for a very long time, we just wouldn't allow expansion of it, with the exception of for any mitigation plantings that, as they're proposing, we would allow a temporary above-ground drip irrigation for a couple of growing seasons to help those establish, and then that would have to come out.
Okay, because right now there is irrigation at the property within the 50-foot. It doesn't look like it's that old.
We can
and-
check into that.
All right, and the abutting property at 15 Cora Nickerson, which is also owned by the same people, Siegel and Saris, has irrigation that I was here a number of years ago, I don't know, 8 or 9 years ago, when Home Watch came in to do, and they're going to do some new plantings, et cetera, and they were specifically told not to put any irrigation in, and there is irrigation there right now. So both properties have irrigation within the 50-foot.
Okay, we will definitely look into that.
And in the past, even just this past year, there has been pesticides, there have been yellow flags telling us, because we have a deeded right-of-way down to the lake that has already been
Changed. yeah.
adjusted, shall we say, by their plantings and their landscaping that they've done on 15 Cora Nickerson. But there's flags telling us not to let children or pets near the grass or near their, in our right-of-way.
Yeah, and this summer, after Home Watch was gone, somebody used
Still happens.
Roundup or something similar to it on the property for the right-of-way to kill, vegetation that's there.
Yeah.
And myself and Steve Swain and Colin Stevenson stopped McNamara from spraying trees because, they're going to spray trees towards the water.
Yep.
So
Okay.
these are our concerns, that since it is the same owners, that but the sincerity of following through on keeping it pristine is
Yeah, and he should know better because he's been,
big development.
big developer, been in the real estate business for years and years and years, teaches at Harvard, real estate, and he should know these things.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Can I just ask a question? Are you the next property on the pond front to the east from these properties?
No, I am across the street of, but I also have property at 0 Cora Nickerson, and our right-of-way goes right next to their property. And it's a right-of-way that's supposed to be
in
12
between.
feet wide, it's supposed to be 12 feet wide, and there's 8 properties that have that right-of-way, and the only people that were, I think 4 of them weren't, notified of this meeting.
Okay, I'll ask Coastal to check the abutter notification. They're required to notify any property owner within 100 feet of the property site. But we can, if you don't have the green cards here tonight, we can check that, please.
So the right-of-way, because these people bring their dogs, they bring their, their children down this right-of-way that's right next door, so they should have some, some say in what's happening there.
Yep. We'd have to, again, without checking the abutters list, right, we'd have to look at that.
Okay, thank you.
I have a question. Where is your right-of-way?
Oh, that's a bit of contention.
Sorry.
On
Thank
this
you very
map,
much.
it goes roughly right.
Yeah, it's on the, it's not the beach access that's on this,
Now,
It's
the
next
deeded
door.
right of way, it isn't there. The deeded right of way
right.
ends at Cora Nickerson, and the deeded right of way goes right there. It's supposed to be 12 feet wide.
Check your butters list.
Siegel and Saris changed it, Home Watch, to jog this way and this way, and they put a wall right here and some other, plantings of where the right-of-way should have gone, at 12 feet wide. Now it's 4 feet wide and goes roughly right there.
This is, if you want to take a look at it, this is who they were required by law to notify.
Yeah,
Okay, you have that, okay.
So, but that was our question was, so people who have deeded rights aren't included in that list?
That's
Is that-
something for maybe the town assessor to talk, we just go by their list,
Right.
so. But you could call Donna in the assessor's office and check that.
Now, does the same owner own the next property?
Yes.
The property that
It's the
you're-
same, yes, it's the same owners. He owns LLC.
7 and 9.
Yeah, and they
Seven
made-
and-
And they
Yep.
made
And they put in a wall?
well, they put
A
in
retaining wall.
They put in a walkway here, going here, between the two properties. It goes right across the right-of-way.
So that's 15 Cora Nickerson in this one.
Mm-hmm.
And when did they put that walkway in?
Last spring through,
Yeah, it was part of their
as soon
work.
as they bought the property, it's been constant working with it.
It sounds like we've got a few other things we gotta look at here.
Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
I have pictures of the irrigation if you might have.
If you would like, you can email them to me. I can give you my email address. That would be great.
Does he believe the irrigation was put in within the last year and a half?
Possibly, yes.
Is that pondwood of the house?
Yes.
I think there needs to be mitigation on the pond side of the house.
Yep.
That section to me looks like it's had, some clearing. Maybe it wasn't 5 years ago, 10 years ago.
Yep.
These are fairly egregious violations. in
Could
my mind.
definitely take another site visit out there to look at not just what we've talked about tonight about the possibility of changing the sand array, but also look at these other items that have come to light tonight
Yeah, and to see where else,
and to see where else. some-
that mitigation could
could
be.
go, yeah.
Because a quick look at it today,
Well, it's hard to tell too
with
because
the
it's
snow.
snowed
I didn't
too.
see much
cover.
room, and this
Yeah.
was all naturalized.
We could take a look.
Okay.
So,
I think we have pretty good agreement
continue
on
it.
the beach plan. The folks
Yeah.
feel pretty good about not having the fiber roll and planting that
Mhm.
slope. So that sounds good.
If the commission wanted to, because this is kind of a unique situation with a lot of moving parts and violations over the years, if it doesn't have to just be me with them doing another site visit, you'd be welcome to come and we can advertise that as such.
Good. Can it be with no snow?
With no, we'll get rid of the snow.
We'll get rid of the snow.
Um,
Okay, what a
If you're
mess.
amenable to that, we can do that. Sure.
Yeah, because you couldn't even see the rock with the
Right.
snow cover there, so.
So it would be a continuation
Mhm.
to do the site visit and address these other items. Do you want 2 weeks, do you want a month?
2 weeks would be fine. I think we can.
At least come back for an update.
How's that agenda for that night?
Not too bad. We do have 30 Harbor Road for the Novak property, which is gonna be a big one. But I don't think other than that, it's huge.
Okay. Where are we heading towards with the deck on this?
It's up for you guys. It is, right at the 50.
Right. And are we-
It's within the limit of work for the original filing,
Yeah.
but it is right at the 50.
Mhm.
I think it would be a benefit for us all to see it together with the engineering company and the land management company.
And is there any limitation on our opportunities to put fines on some of these infractions?
I don't know who we would find, because we don't know exactly when things necessarily happened, especially I mean, it's hard to find a previous owner
Right.
for some of the things. So I think we try
We can talk about
to
that, I guess.
improve the resource as much as possible, because fines are minimal compared to maybe the benefit we can have to the resource area.
I think the other question is, they presented, they came forward with
Yeah,
the issue.
They incriminated themselves.
Which I'm not,
That's favorable? I don't know if that would,
Yeah.
right,
so it's
that's
better
all I'm
than
saying,
the
it's a
other way.
favorable thing, that's all
Right.
I'm saying.
So our next meeting would be March 20th. Maybe I'll send an email around in the morning about a site visit early next week.
I might request a Friday site visit.
Okay. We could do that, it
Is
just
that
might,
possible?
we might not be able to get plans, you might not be able to get plans for the next meeting, but we can see.
Right.
So yes, so you can make it, that would be good. So next Friday, we'll pencil that in, and I'll send around an email about that.
So a week from Friday.
Yeah, I can't, unfortunately,
Yep.
I have a field day with AmeriCorps this Friday, I can't get out of.
Because the snow's still
Huh?
there. The snow's still there.
Not the 8th, 15th.
The 15th.
The 15th.
Yeah, Friday the 15th.
The Ides of March.
And then, so the continuation would be until March 20th.
Yeah, I know.
Sorry about that.
It is. Okay, so I guess I'll move that we continue the hearing until 2
March
weeks.
20th?
March 20th.
I'll second it.
Second, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Motion carries. Thank you.
Amy, in the meantime, are you gonna, will you have time to look into the next property that he owns?
Yes, I will. Can we take 2 minutes, and maybe since we have some people here for the cranberry discussion, we can get into that?
Sure.
We take a 2-minute break?
Okay.
Amy?
Yeah.
Do you think you might be going out there before the
I've never heard you do
I don't
that
think I've done
before.
it, I've never done that, I don't think. So we're gonna start up again and have a discussion on the management actions, the Conservation Commission of the Herring River Bogs and Bell's Neck Conservation Area. And I wanna make an announcement, the next item on the agenda is discussion for management of agricultural lease lands in the care and custody of Conservation Commission. We're not gonna discuss that tonight. That item should have had the individual properties specifically noted, so we're gonna put it on the agenda for April 3rd, a month from now. And so we'll just discuss the Bell's Neck Bogs tonight. So how do we begin, Amy?
Call me. Sorry, I was
Yep.
Mr. Kukunis in the audience said he may have a problem with the April date, but we will talk.
We can always
We
reschedule
can
it.
reschedule it.
Yeah.
Obviously, we want you to be there. So yes, we can chat about, are people here, oh, everyone, people are here for the Bell's Neck Bogs and something else. Sorry, Sean. Okay. Do you want to do a quick extension first before we do the bogs, to get Sean out of here?
Yeah, let's do
Can we
that.
do that? This could be a little lengthy. It'll just take a couple of minutes. So which one are you here for?
The fish house.
The Fish House, Zaretti. So an extension request, they're asking for 3 years?
We're asking for 3 years. If you remember the history of this, the order of conditions was issued, then it was appealed. Superseding order was issued, appealed again. Finally got the order of conditions in 2018, after he had already done an emergency to do emergency
Right.
repairs. The emergency repairs got done, so he hasn't had time to gear up to do the final repairs. Spent an exorbitant amount of money fighting the appeal and also doing the emergency repairs. So he just liked the time available to actually do the design that you guys approved. And now it's gonna expire this year.
Right. So, yeah, as Sean said, it spent most of its life in litigation. Key pieces for conservation on that parcel are removal of some of the old asphalt that's crumbling in, removal of the fish weirs, replanting salt marsh. Those things all still need to be done. And because 2 out of the 3 years were spent in court with this, we would recommend a 3-year extension for the fish, Fran and Deborah Zaretti, 11 Harbor Way.
Okay. Do we have a motion?
I'll make a motion to extend, to recognize the request for extension permit for 11 Harbor Way.
I'll second it.
Stan seconds it. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Thank
Please
you.
sign.
Thank you for pulling it ahead, too.
Oh, that's the culled file. There's only one of everything in there, not 3.
That was a big one.
That was a big one. Okay. Thank you all for humoring us with that. So back to the discussion regarding the Bell's Neck Cranberry Bogs. Just to kind of recap where we've gone in the past few years, the previous lease was up in April of 2017. And right prior to, but for about a year prior to that to now, the bogs have not been cultivated. So the commission last year, after a long time of debate, decided to put the bogs back out for lease with some stipulations about organic cultivation. We did get a proposal. That proposal was withdrawn, and we're here now because to talk about whether or not to put the lease back out, or the commission had other ideas as far as what the management should look like of that area. Does that sum it up accurately?
Right.
I do have, just so you all know, I found a lot of information regarding our town leased agricultural lands, one of which is this property right here. I have the taking by eminent domain. I have the previous lease agreements. Pardon me for a second here while I organize myself. So there was debate about whether or not this property was, I mean, it's under the care and custody of the Conservation Commission, there's not a doubt of that. But whether or not this land was put under the care and custody of the Conservation Commission with the express written language that is to be kept in agricultural, that this portion of the property was to be kept in agricultural use. There are some documentations from the 1960s about the lease of the bogs. And it does talk about for conservation purposes, which also included the ability to grow cranberries. That's what I have here.
Thanks, Amy. That's been an important topic people have considered.
Mm-hmm.
We have heard that the language said that it was purchased or acquired for cranberry growing, but it does seem to my eye that that the language is fairly generic, saying it was acquired for conservation purposes.
I have to go farther into it, to be honest. A lot of what I have in here, some of it was emailed to me, but a lot of this was discovered earlier today when looking through our archives. There's like a wealth of information from all of our properties. So, just a second.
Okay, do we want to go around the table and have people summarize their thoughts, or do we want to ask the audience to give thoughts and comments? We have gone through this a couple times, so it's it's not a new topic to us. What's the preference of the commissioners?
Can I ask what happened to the original RFP, why that didn't meet expectations?
Yeah, we had fairly specific requirements, and I certainly felt that those requirements were not met with the one submittal we had. And so, but I think before that, the applicant withdrew before we could vote on it. But I do feel that I felt that it was missing a number of key elements that were spelled out in the RFP.
Is it worthwhile to go back and review those requirements to see if they should be reduced or moderated somewhat to give a better chance for the applicant to stay in the picture? I mean, I'm obviously biased. I'm hoping we can keep some cranberry bogs in town,
Right.
as you know that, Brian.
Yes, yeah, and I think we should do that. But I also think that some commission members haven't really expressed their feelings for this. So I think knowing where the commission wants to go would be pretty important as well.
Yeah, I was just trying to, I think it'd be some clarification on what the details were that,
So,
that stopped the applicant going
Right,
forward.
if we were to go to bid again, we'd want it to be successful.
yeah. So my recollection is we put the request for proposals out with a series of criteria. The commission received a proposal, and then the commission responded with a list of questions to that proponent. At that point, it was withdrawn.
Mike?
Chairman, thank you for the opportunity to talk.
Sure.
First, and not to single anyone out, but Mark, Mark was the sole respondent to the RFP.
Yes.
Mark, if you're still interested, and I know some of this is foreign language to different board members, you should recuse yourself and get out from behind the table and come out into the audience.
Is that the appropriate course of action?
Yes. If you are still interested in responding to an RFP, or still interested in that bog. If you're not, it doesn't make any difference. But if you're still interested at all, you should recuse yourself. That's just one. Second, I don't represent the Board of Selectmen tonight, I represent myself, but the board did take an action, and we did have it in the meeting, and we did encourage the commission to try and do anything that they could to keep this a cranberry bog, because it is in our heritage, and it is one of the few town-owned bogs. We often go out for RFPs on several things, and sometimes we get one response, sometimes we get no response, sometimes we get multiple responses that don't meet the criteria, and then normally we will go back out with an RFP. So possibly if the commission could see to it to look at the RFP and the response and see what was missing, or if maybe it was just too much for an applicant to respond to, and lessen the criteria to it, and do anything they can to keep it a cranberry bog. That has been kind of the path that a lot of people have requested that we go with this. So I urge you to look at that RFP and maybe put it back out and look at the criteria that you put in it, because once we let it go, it's gone. And Brad, as you've mentioned in the past, it's close to gone anyway. And anyone to respond to this, I think Mr. Kukunis could probably tell us tonight, there's not a lot of money left in the cranberry industry. So this is not a get-rich thing for somebody. It's something that they're going to do to supplement an income or because they want to be a cranberry farmer. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Leo Kukunis, local cranberry grower. For the record, certified organic cranberry grower for 20 years now. I hope, and I want to encourage the board to put this out for agricultural use, lease for agricultural use, and I hope they find a proponent that will work with the Conservation Commission to manage the property for them. I stand up here tonight to tell you, because I've already heard once, we would like to see someone make a go of it, which I commend you for having that feeling, but let me give you some reality. On a bog that size, average harvest would be 20,000 pounds of cranberries, would be an average harvest. In the heyday, they were getting 80 cents a pound. A grower would make about $16,000 a year. Today, and from what I understand, there may be some that will disagree with me, but it's certainly not getting any better. That same 20,000 pounds would bring in about $2,000. The height of the cranberry season, conventional cranberries were getting 80 cents a pound. Today, conventional cranberry growers are getting 10 cents a pound. If you do the math on a $20,000 load, that's what you're expecting. So the town should not disillusion themselves by any way, fashion, or form that someone is even going to break even, make a living, or make any money whatsoever growing cranberries. Not going to happen. And I'm a perfect witness for that. In 20 years in the cranberry business, I've lost probably close to $400,000 of my own personal savings, and have gone from making in the heyday in organic cranberries, again, $2 a pound when I first got into business and was growing organically, and today I'm making 30 cents a pound. What does that come out to in numbers? On a $20,000 pound harvest, I'd bring in 40 grand for the year. On a 20,000 pound harvest, I'm bringing in, what, 6 grand, if that. So there's no money in the cranberry business. I do believe that in the best interest of conservation and the best interest of land management, that if this board and the town is lucky enough to have someone who will step up to the plate and work with you to have a final end goal and achievement onto how you want this property managed, I think it's in the best interest of the town. To allow it to go fallow, I don't believe is a smart move in any way, fashion, or form, or to use it for any other, what the term is, let it go back to natural state, I think is actually going to cost the taxpayers a lot of money, because the natural state would actually require to do things like removing the sluiceways, removing the man-made structures that are in there, and probably considering some plantings and stuff. So there's actually costs affiliated to that. So I think that if there is someone who is willing to step up to the plate, and by the way, and I do want the record to state this, I have absolutely no interest at all in bidding on this if you decide to put it out again. I wouldn't take it if you paid me. So please, I need that said. And I also do agree with the selectman that was previously up there. If there's a member of this board that is interested in it, I would highly suggest they step off the board now, because, again, it's going to hamper anyone's ability to answer a second RFP if you guys decide to put one out. I know on the agenda you had some other discussions out there. I won't go down there too much, but I just want you all to know that a good agricultural practices is good land management. And not every piece of land needs to be a place where we can walk our dogs or a place where we can stroll around and enjoy. Some pieces of land require a little bit more management to keep them vegetation and keep the whatever is growing and can grow to continue to grow, number one, but also it's in the best interest. If you decide to put an RFP out as a organic cranberry grower, I would advise you not to limit the grower or the proposer to strictly growing organically. I would advise you to have in the RFP that you will look upon a organic grower more advantageously than you would someone who wants to grow conventionally. That's part of the 30B procurement law, and you're well within your rights to do that. But to limit it strictly as an organic grower, I'm here in front of you to tell you, you cannot grow cranberries in the state of Massachusetts organically. Cannot be done. And I'm a 20-year grower to tell you that. You lose acreage over the years to weeds, to weed control. I have taken on a system where, because I could not find a good herbicide, we use sheep and goats. So one of my bogs is completely, all my bogs are completely fenced in, where we let animals run and eat the vegetation. Sheep and goats do not like cranberry vines, but they do like the grass and the wooded plants. However, they've not kept up with a lot of the areas, so there's encroachment areas where I end up losing vine, the ditches and areas like that. So over the course of 20 years, when you start out with 10 acres of pristine bog, as a cranberry grower, after 20 years, you're lucky if you have 6 acres left of really good producing vine. Herbicides, the weed killers, are a big problem. Another big problem is fungicide. Cranberry growing is very susceptible to fungus. I've had crops where they have been wonderful, great bloom, great pollination, really good cranberries, but by the time we harvest them, as soon as we pick them off the vine and we try to sell them as fresh fruit, they rot within 7 days because we cannot find a good organic fungicide. So there's a lot of these things to consider, especially when you really want to limit it to just an organic growing site. My suggestion again would be to say that you would look at an organic grower more advantageous, a conventional grower advantageously. And I think if this town is lucky enough to have someone who's interested, we should be jumping all over it, and we should give it to them for free, quite frankly. I don't think any dollar value at all is necessary for the town, and I speak as a fairly large taxpayer in this town. I think it's well worth it to have someone who's willing to work with Amy, work with you people, and do the right thing by land management. So thank you again, and I'll be here if there's any questions in regards to growing, or if you need any help in that matter, I'd be more than happy to help you.
Thanks, Leo.
I'm Alan Hall, North Harwich, 7th generation in the town of Harwich Cranberries. Currently, I'm part-time. My ultimate dream was to be full-time. As Mr. Kukunis say, I'm not going to challenge some of his things because I have a different outlook on cranberries. However, cranberries were quite lucrative in this town. It started here, the commercial cultivation. It started in Dennis with another hall. Okay, Harwich has a significant amount of history in this town of cranberries. Ever since I've grown up, the dinner tables, breakfast has been cranberries in my family. My grandfather owned this particular parcel of land. We're currently abutters to this land. I don't want to see this bog go like Great Swamp. I don't want to see it go away. I don't want to see bogs go offline. I know there's no money in it, as people say, it's doom and gloom right now. But there's still a will and there's a way to do something with that piece of property. The benefit of that piece of property is you got a large reservoir which makes that bog gravity fed. So the economics of running that cranberry bog is very minimal because you have gravity fed water that can be controlling late water, which helps on fungicides and helps on bug control and different things.
The bog's been sitting there for 5 years, almost 5 years now, fallow, and it is salvageable. I disagree with the amount of cranberries that grow per acre. The state average is about 150 barrels per acre. Now, I've been a member of the Growers Association for 30 years myself, my father, my grandfather for 100 years. As I say, it's a part-time venture, but I got 2 sons to my left that want to carry on that tradition, which we actively, as you well know, we were in front of you a couple months ago with a piece of property that my grandfather left to my father. I don't want to see this bog go down. As Mr. Kukunis, I'll agree with him. You should give it to somebody for nothing, $1 a year. The same way my father leased it from the town in 1972 for $1 a year. This bog was bought in 1964, 65 from Ralph Guida, who bought it from my grandfather. The town bought it for conservation. It was the first largest parcel of conservation land bought in the town of Harwich. At that time, they didn't know what to do. They rented it out to a guy named Lawrence Washburn. He was an active cranberry grower. He had his own Washburn cranberry juice factory up in Brockton and Bridgewater. He had the bog. He went out of business. Cranberries had been down to 0 3 or 4 times that I know from what my grandfather has told me. People have walked away. People wanted to jump off the Cape Cod Canal. They've lost a lot of money in the cranberry industry. But that bog is a lot of history in the town, and we shouldn't lose it. We're spending millions of dollars on new buildings, new roads, new schools, wastewater, all these things. We own that property. It's there, it's open, it's active. Let's lease it out. Let's keep it going. If somebody fails, at least they tried. I don't want to see the town of Harwich fail. So there's a lot of history in that. You know, that whole area was built specifically for the cranberry bogs. That reservoir was backed up the Heron Run in 1929 by Marcus L. Uran, the founder of Ocean Spray. He owned that whole area. If Mr. Uran didn't come to Harwich in about 1909, there would have been a lot more poorer people in the town of Harwich. He employed a numerous amount of people. He bought up a lot of lands. A lot of the local Cape Codders had bogs here and there. He bought it all up and made United Cape Cod Cranberry Company. A lot of history. We have the Hall of Fame in the town of Harwich Community Center. I think Marcus Uran should be on that wall. If he didn't come to town, there would have been a lot of poor people, or poorer than what we were. So the cranberries, they can be grown there. There's no issue with that. To go back on the reservoir, gravity fed, 1929. That's why Mr. Uran put that in there. He controlled the water all the way up the Heron River to Great Western Road, Main Street. There were several bogs along the whole river, all the way to Hinckley's Pond. Go on a website called Historical Aerials. 1934, you can see all the cranberry bogs in Harwich that you wouldn't believe there was bogs where they are filled in today, in houses. So I've spoken with other members in the town that are interested in that property. I was interested in it. I may be interested in a portion of it. I don't know if I could handle the whole thing. I got 2 young lads over here that might want to help me out. But I agree with Mr. Kukunis. Don't limit it to organic. There's plenty of new chemicals that the state University of Massachusetts Cranberry Experiment Station has monitored and lessened the restricted pesticides just on their own because they don't want to hurt the environment. And it's a cheaper way of growing cranberries. So they've done the study. They have the money behind them to do all that scientific data. Don't limit it to organic. I'm going to try like heck to keep our little bog going. And I want to see the town keep theirs going. Whoever it may be, don't let it go. Don't restrict it. Let somebody take the chance and go ahead and do it. When you let things go, it becomes more of a problem. Vandalism, trespassing, garbage. You can just ride through the woods of Punkhorn. That's a place the town of Brewster bought for conservation. A lot of areas that have been vandalized and a lot of things left in the woods that shouldn't be there. So I think keeping it open, management that way with a cranberry bog, maybe diversify it into different kind of entities as far as different growing things on different parcels there, but it doesn't hurt. We already own it. It's under the care and custody of the conservation. We've got talented people in this town, in this room, that could help and keep it going.
That's all I got to say. I hope you do the right thing. I hope the paperwork gets a lot less. I hope it's like a one page. Keep it simple, as they say. Doesn't need to be complicated. That's all I got to say. Thank you.
Before we go any further, I gotta ask a question, if I may. Is the appropriate course of action for me to recuse myself, to make a statement, or discuss this from a citizen's perspective?
If you are, as it was stated, if you are still have interest in this bog, you should recuse yourself, but you can be allowed through the chair to make comments as a citizen.
Then I will recuse myself at this time.
And then it would be, you could recognize him.
Yep.
Does that mean that Mark would speak?
I will make a few comments when the opportunity arises.
Abstaining from.
No, but will he speak next?
I don't know if he wants to.
TMDLs, or should I?
Brad may want to ask.
You gonna mention TMDLs, or should I?
I don't know what you're,
It's natural.
what?
It's
Oh, yeah, oh, that, yeah, that's part of what I would have to
Yeah.
say.
You want to see if there was more comments?
Mark, would you like to make a comment?
May I say something, Mr. Chairman?
Just 1 second, we want to see if Mr. Coleman wants to speak.
I do, but I don't know what the appropriate.
Oh, I'm sorry. I apologize if I said.
Okay, so what we heard is if you have an interest, you probably should excuse yourself from the discussion tonight. So I think that's pretty good advice, Mark. Okay, so please.
Mr. Chairman, Benjamin Hall, son of Alan Hall, grandson of Arthur H. Hall, Sr., Cranberry family in the town of Harwich for many years. As my father just recently mentioned, there is a lot of history in the town on that particular piece of property, and how he mentioned that it should be continued use. I, for one, personally might have an interest in that, if you were to consider that. There's a lot of cranberry history in this town. My family is one of them. I've been around cranberries. When I started walking, my first steps were in a cranberry bog. I've been around cranberries. I enjoy it. Sure, there's not a lot of money in it, probably none at all, but if someone has the interest and passion to do it, they should do it. That's my input on there, in my opinion.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for allowing me to get back up again. Just two things, and I know Amy mentioned that she had some things that she had today and she didn't get a chance to review them. But for the record, I think there was an Article 95 in the 1966 special town meeting.
They have
Which
that.
actually, okay, good. And the other thing I just wanted to add, or to my conclusion, because I was told I didn't say it the last time I was up here, the term best management practices is a key. That's something that the state follows, all good growers follow, and you'll be able to, I don't know, govern, watch over, make sure that someone's following best management practices or best agricultural practices. Thank you.
Thank you.
If you have a minute, I can clarify some of the documentation that was given to me in regards to the 1965 and 1966 acquisitions. Just give me a second to find, this is, I believe this is online for you. But let me just find the language. Okay, I don't want that one. So in 1965, it talks about 1966, it does talk about the acquisition of what is known as the Herring River Estates, which is this bog area. It was purchased also with the help, 50% reimbursement with self-help funding. Sorry. It talks in 1966 in Article 1 of the purchase or taking by eminent domain for conservation purposes under General Laws 40, Section 8C, the reservoir and where it's bounded, so it's talking about the Bell's Neck conservation area. It does talk about their cranberry operation. In Article 95 in 1966, to see if the town will vote to authorize the Conservation Commission to enter into lease agreements for the cultivation of cranberries, which is under the care or the jurisdiction of the Conservation Commission and act fully thereon. So the commission was given the authorization to enter into lease agreements for these bog areas in 1966. Authorization, I don't know if that means necessarily whether they're required to.
Is that specific to that property, or is it for all conservation lands?
This was the Bell's Neck, I believe.
But what is the wording of the document?
I don't have the whole thing from that year, so I'd have to look back, and I do want to see the whole thing. I believe it may have been originally from Mr. Hall.
Well, I just got a question. You made a comment. We don't know if we're required to continue lease.
Authorized, yeah.
Required. Why wouldn't you? That's the question I have.
I'm not saying we
No, no, no,
necessarily
no,
wouldn't.
I'm not saying you. I'm just saying, why wouldn't we? It's been leased since 1966. No, I understand that. 1966, it's been leased. Why wouldn't we now? If somebody's willing to take on this parcel of land and has an idea, why wouldn't we? That should be the question. Not the
I was
question
just
if
letting
we
him-
can. Why wouldn't we? Why don't we want to?
I was just
We've
pointing out
discussed
that we
that point.
can.
I'll have some comments to that
Thank you.
briefly, but I think we'll go through what Amy has first on the history, because the property was acquired in 1993, right?
No.
No?
That was the taking,
That was the taking.
some of the taking.
That was only taken in town meeting floor to clear the title.
Right.
They took it by eminent domain. They actually bought it in 1966, 65, 66 from Ralph Guida, who
Yep.
bought it from my grandfather.
Okay.
And that is information that you have in here. So Article 95 in 1966 is not specific, I'm sorry, to the Bell's Neck. It just said the town, it's in general. The town, the commission is authorized to enter into lease agreements for cultivation of cranberries on land which is under your care and custody.
That was my impression.
It's
That
not
was for
specific
our land in
necessarily.
general.
So that's my fault on reading all of this. I got a little confused. Yes, so in 1965 was the original acquisition. 65 and 66 of the Bell's Neck.
Okay, so it's still a bit of a gray area.
It is. The other ones, which we'll talk about in the future, it's a little bit less gray. So there is definitely the ability and the history here.
Right.
That's,
We had these questions reviewed by attorneys for the town in 2009, and that document didn't really come out strongly saying that they could conclude much without more analysis. They did indicate that this and the Jenkins logs were purchased or acquired for conservation purposes. But they do say that more analysis would be needed to really
yeah.
conclude exactly what happened. So it's an important point, but I think I'd like to hear from folks around the table, and if you want to summarize your thoughts and on this topic, I think it might be helpful. You want to start? You want to start down here?
Sure, sure, yeah. Well, yeah, I really appreciate the history also. I have a similar affinity for cranberries. I'll eat them by the handful raw every fall, love them. My family also owned a cranberry bog, part of my heritage. I do see some reasons not to fully renovate these bogs anyway. There's some potential serious risks to herring, which have been documented over the years. The BSC group at one point was hired by the town to do a land management plan for the property, and they noted just while they were there, hundreds of herring fry inside the bog ditches and concluded that there were impacts to herring from the bog operations. And part of that is because of the gravity feed situation actually creates that problem. If it was a pumped in, pumped out situation, that could probably be mitigated. The other issue is just that currently about 85% of the bogs are pretty natural, and there's some really healthy native vegetation in there. There's tupelo trees, red maples, native shrubs like winterberry, bayberry, sheep laurel, and it's really a wonderfully functioning vegetated wetland at the moment. Wildlife is thriving. There's a river otter run between the flume and the bogs. Turtles nesting everywhere. It's kind of an amazing restoration that nature has done in the past 5 to 10 years there. So that there's a lot of value to that, to the town, in my opinion. And beyond that, looking around town, some of our most valuable natural assets are abandoned cranberry bogs. Down in Island Pond, some of the ones you mentioned, on the upper Herring River, Cold Brook now. I mean, these are places that are just teeming with wildlife and very healthy, real bright spots in our ecology in town. So there's a real value to the bogs and their natural state. Much of that bog was natural wetland to begin with, maybe not all of it, but we have core samples showing deep peat and much of the bog, which means cedar swamps most likely. There's a small cedar swamp to the south, which shows signs that could migrate back into the bogs. It's very valuable habitat. In that study by the BSC group, they did conclude that naturalizing the bogs would be the thing to do. It would improve water quality and overall ecological function of the Bell's Neck area. So those are just some reasons why to let it go natural, maybe with some management. I see that there is some sentiment towards maintaining some cranberries there, and the way the economics are, we are likely to lose other bogs throughout town, some of the privately held bogs. One idea I've had is to maybe maintain a smaller bog in the central section there. There's actually a pretty good patch of really healthy cranberries existing there. That's just an option that I thought of. That's all I've got for now.
Comments, Carol?
Well, I listened with a lot of interest to your comments about organic versus non-organic growing. And that's one area that concerns me. I think we're much more aware today than we were years ago of the dangers of chemicals leaching into our other water systems. And as this bog is so close to the Herring River itself, I am fearful of allowing someone to put chemicals into the water system. We're doing treatments on ponds to change the course of some of the pollution that has been caused by other cranberry bogs over the years. So I hesitate to allow anything that is non-organic, and it sounds like it wouldn't work organically. So we're caught between a rock and a hard place in looking at it that way. At least I am.
So, I hear what the cranberry growers here, or people with a history of growing cranberries here, have to say about the importance of their heritage and our heritage in cranberry growing, and I understand that. I also share Jim's sentiment about, and I can't speak as eloquently as Jim can, about the natural benefits, but I also think there are other things, broader, longer-term considerations that we have to keep in mind, and that we all should be thinking seriously about. And one of which is the loss of various fisheries, and you're mentioning the health of the herring in that river, and I think that we should be thinking about the value of restoration, if there is more restoration to be had of the herring fisheries, and what contribution could be made to that by letting those bogs be restored to some natural state. I think the health of the groundwater is a huge concern, and nitrogen, providing a nitrogen sink for the groundwater to attempt to deal with our nitrogen issues. And I also think, and I don't know to what extent those bogs would contribute, but one of the things we have to be seriously concerned about is sea level rise and what effect that is going to have on the existing natural wetlands. And I haven't informed myself. I don't know what the elevation of the West Reservoir there is relative to sea level, but I think these are all things that we have to be seriously concerned about in the future, and whether or not taking the risk associated with trying to continue the cranberry cultivation in that bog is really worth the risk. And anyone who would take this on, and listening to Mr. Kukunis, I'm not at all convinced that anybody in their right mind would take this on, since it would be a cost sink.
I didn't say that.
No, you didn't say I was convinced. I'm telling you I'm not convinced, and none of what you said surprises me. It's clearly a difficult thing, and I believe that the town deciding to proceed with a lease arrangement, which is a commitment for some significant period of time, right? No cranberry grower is going to accept a lease agreement that lasts a year. It's going to be a 10-year thing, right? Mm-hmm. And that's a risk to the taxpayers, because I think, given your description, there's a significant likelihood that the lease actually wouldn't last whatever the term is, 10 years, because someone would go broke trying to make it work. And I don't see the point in doing that, as opposed to looking for solutions that help us restore that to its natural state. And unfortunately, I mean, my view is cranberry growing is probably a lot more benign an activity than other things that happen on Cape Cod, like overdevelopment, too much residential development, which is part of the reason why we're in the predicament we're in. But on the other hand, we're already in that predicament, and we have to compensate for that somewhere. And I believe that it's probably more likely that we can get some valuable compensation by letting that land go into a more natural state, not putting down any more fertilizers, not putting down any more chemicals, any more fungicides, herbicides, whatever. All those things are going to get into the groundwater and cause problems, and we don't know what problems they cause even. We don't even understand that. It's like the whole problem with glyphosate. Some people say it does nothing, other people say it causes cancer. Probably what it really does is just kill bees. Anyway, and that's glyphosate, something that people have been looking at and concerned about for years. I don't even know if that's a useful herbicide for cranberry growers, but if you're not gonna be organic, you're gonna be using some herbicide, and what is that gonna do to the environment? I don't know, I've gone on probably, I'm ranting here, but I'm trying to explain my sense that I'm not in favor of issuing a lease to a cranberry grower on this property.
Stan?
You just made me think of something that I hadn't even thought about, having been on the river a lot and everything, and even mentioning to Amy or to you the rising tides there. How close are those bogs to be possibly over or flooded during some of these high tides we've seen? I mean, I've seen the parking lot down on Route 28 where the boat ramp is completely
Yeah,
flooded.
there's a few feet of tidal amplitude at the West Reservoir, but it's all freshwater backing up. It's not salt.
Okay.
The outlet flume is about 4 feet away from salt water.
Yeah.
Yeah, right.
No, I was just curious.
The outlet flume of that bog, which discharges into the salt water, there's a West Reservoir, which is here, and then the salt water estuary coming in from Hand River from the ocean. That's where the water from the reservoir goes through the bog, gravity fed,
Right.
and comes out the outlet flume down to the salt water.
But do you think that's the backing up of fresh water? The tide's there, absolutely, but I think it's...
The tide goes up and down.
Right, but it's a backing up of fresh water for the most part. His question about salt, I think, coming into the bog through that avenue, I think we're a ways away from that.
You're a long ways. You can always put a damper on, the outlet.
I mean, we're talking about significant sea level rise impacts in 50 years.
Right.
But we're still
Right.
a ways away from
No,
that.
but I was just curious
Not
when you
intended
mentioned
for
that.
this one.
And I guess I'm gonna be a little extreme here, and if you're gonna start worrying about the fertilizing and growing, we better stop all farming all over the country. But, wait, I'm just being sarcastic here now. But to go back from a serious standpoint, I was in favor of supporting, of keeping the bog, and I'm still in support of keeping the bog, even if it's a historical reason. One of the questions, and I don't know the answer, and I don't expect to get the answer now. I know the RFP or the proposal was withdrawn. There was no discussion after the fact as to why it was withdrawn, at least that I know of. I'm just looking back at that proposal, the minimum requirement, not the proposal, but the minimum requirements that were being required. They're very extensive. And looking back at some of the other leases, I don't know if the other leases required as much data as this would have been required. And if just from looking back, it looks to be kind of imposing to somebody. Now, from my background as in the manufacturing controller, what we required would have been kind of normal and would be very basic of something you would require. But for a local person doing this small operation, that's kind of a daunting task. The summary we got was a summary, didn't have all the detail. And going back to some of the things that were asked out of here from the other audience, was this a much larger burden than it should have been to somebody, whether it be Mark or whoever might do a proposal in the future? Are we asking more than should be required from a RFP standpoint as compared to what others? And I don't know why this was so detailed compared to others before.
The reason it was a little bit more detailed was, correct me if I'm wrong, Brad and others, primarily because the herring fishery. And also, I mean, there was the other bogs, a lot of the other bogs in town don't have as much of a concern with the herring run.
It wasn't
as
just the
this we
herring
do.
run. I'm
No, it
looking-
wasn't just,
I
but
mean-
that was one of the, the chemical application is trying to improve upon our chemical usage, but the wildlife was a major reason why we had why we were as stringent with the request for proposals.
I would say that, as well as the fact the previous lease just didn't work out. There was some problems, and
Right.
so we did not
Yep.
want to, this commission 10 years ago discussed this entire issue under that previous lease because of all the concerns with the fish kills and what was happening there. So
Right.
there's a fair amount of history to concerns over that property. It goes back a ways, so I viewed it as a pretty good request for proposals. I thought it covered the bases, it covered the discussion we had about organic farming, which we now hear that, may not be the best approach. But I thought it was reasonable for a public property being put out to bid for a lease.
Okay. But again, and again, some of the things that you mentioned in there regarding the fertilization and the management regarding herring and everything, I understand that, but there's a lot of other specifics, specific annual operating plan and everything, which as an accountant, I would fully agree with, but is that something that's a real requirement for this potential operation? The staffing, individual staffing. So again, I don't want to go into the specifics here,
Yeah.
but it just seemed to be a very extensive requirement for somebody to put together to what I would have done from in my career. And again, I don't know if that was the reason why it was withdrawn, if it was that or something else. I'm just saying something that I thought about after the fact.
We all did review it, and we all
And
provided.
I had a
comments.
lot of questions, and I raised a lot of those questions because I said, yes, what was giving originally was a summary, not specifics. But how detailed, maybe we were being unrealistic, I don't know. That was just a thought that I think of looking back.
Amy, want to make a comment?
When you tasked me with drafting the language for the RFP, what I did is I looked at our old ones that we've done before, but I also looked, because a lot of those are pretty old, I looked at neighboring towns and to see what their language was. So, just in all fairness, we're not trying to penalize this particular bog or the potential applicants. A lot of these, I looked at Falmouth and Yarmouth and others, and I just looked at the requirements for their request for proposals, and the whole monitoring plans, that's a lot, what was in a lot of those. So I didn't try to, we didn't try to make it any necessarily harder than abutting towns. We just tried to get it in concert with what other towns are requiring.
That's all I have. Other than, I would like having blueberries more than,
Hold off till everyone's had a chance to speak up here.
I would like blueberries more than cranberries, but. I'm done.
I'm not going to speak as eloquently as the speakers before me. I understand the historical aspects, and I agree with them. I understand that there were fish kills, and I understand that that's a major concern, and so is the use of fertilizers. I would hope that anybody that would take this on would work closely with the Conservation Commission on trying to rectify fish kills and trying to rectify a lot of the issues that are coming up with the fertilizer. I don't really want to see every town-owned bog go fallow. There's history here, and I totally understand the history. As a teacher, I think it's important to the history of Harwich, to the history of Cape Cod, and I want to back the growers. And I understand from the conservation aspect, but I think there can be a good marriage between the growers and conservation. I just would like to see that happen. That's all I have to say.
Thanks, Paula. I'll wrap up my thoughts pretty quickly because I think I've spoken before that I do favor naturalizing the bogs. I think it'd be really hard to make a go at this site if it was private property, and so it could only be potentially viable by being public property leased out at a very low cost. So, and to answer your thoughts on this, Mr. Hall, I know you were asking why would you not want to, and I really respect where you're coming from because it's a really important part of our town's culture, and it's really deep and it's important, but I do think that things are changing, and we can look at this property as conservation land and realize that the benefit to me to the town would be to have it as a place that becomes better wildlife habitat, is a place where we do not add additional nutrients, phosphorus, nitrogen, pesticides, herbicides, and it would be a benefit to reduce the impacts to the herring run as well. So those things to me are really powerful benefits to the town of Harwich, whereas I think the lease would provide really limited benefits. I know the cultural piece is really valuable, but the return to the town of Harwich I don't see as that great. Looking at the whole period of the previous lease, not a lot happened there. You know, it wasn't really successful. So it's a change in view, and I think it's hard to really look at it and think it's the greatest way to go. But I think this site is it's slowly naturalizing one with the other, whether it's 20 years or 40 years. The town is full of places that have just gone back to nature like this, and they become really useful habitat. So it's a tough viewpoint to have because it's really counter to, I think, our recent culture, but I think it's the right approach for a conservation property like this, so that's my preference. So, sure, any follow-up comments?
I'm always constantly thinking, and you know, I respect all of your input and your opinions. A couple other factual things. I was the chairman of the Agriculture Commission with Mr. Kukunis was spearheading that as part of a member of the Farm Bureau in the town of Harwich. We passed the right to farm bylaw only, 12, 15 years ago, whatever it was now, I've lost time. But we passed that in the town of Harwich specifically to protect people in agriculture from people telling us you can't do this, you can't do that, okay? Through best management practices, through the University of Massachusetts, the Cranberry Station in Wareham, they have spent millions of dollars. Unfortunately, their funding is going down because of the whole way the country and the world's are going. But they paid the freight, they've done the research, things are changing, as you just said. Nitrogen levels, fertilizer. It's funny, we all talk about that in the fish kills. They actually have fish fertilizer for the cranberry bogs that they use that were made from fish. So it's just one of these things that we can all coexist and make it work. I would suggest to the Conservation Committee to access our Community Preservation Act, or whatever it's called now in the town of Harwich, that has that funding mechanism, to go and acquire some money from them to rehabilitate the inlet flume area to protect the herring from coming into the cranberry bogs. We don't want herring in the cranberry bogs either. You know, so it's a constant battle. The town has the money and the funds. They could put that. Where the inlet flume is now at that bog wasn't there. It used to be further on another piece, right at the reservoir, because that little bog that's underwater, my father put that underwater and put the inlet flume where it is today to get it away from people fishing because they were vandalizing things. So, you know, there's a lot of things that can go both ways. And it's funny, I kind of think in the past, what happens if my grandfather never sold it? The town wouldn't have this discussion. It would be privately run and held, and he would probably keep it going. All right, so when we get things in the conservation hands and into people's hands and other people's, you take away from private property rights, then we tend to go public, but public kind of limits everything. And I don't believe in that. That's not what we were created for. That's not what this country was built on. And we continue to do this in these small little settings, and it's set in stone, and we're slowly eroding, and it's not right. So I would hope that you would consider the town of Harwich, the people that have paid the freight for all these years to keep that bog and get that land going, for Marcus Sharon to put it into one big thing, for my grandfather to buy it, for Ralph Geyer to buy it, and then he feared the town of Harwich into putting 300 and something houses there. And that's why they bought it for conservation. It wasn't because of the cranberry bogs. They didn't want development. So we have to look at things in a whole different spectrum. We're the minorities on Cape Cod now, cranberries. It's happening. There's not too many cranberry bogs out there. As a gentleman, everybody, I agree with you. Economically, it's not a good thing that somebody's going to come and invest in. But don't let it go. It's the last one we really have, other than the ones that are currently leased. Don't. It needs to continue on in some fashion. Thank you.
Thank you again, Mr. Chairman. I'll really be brief because I think we've covered a lot tonight, but a couple of things that you guys have set up there that I just want to kind of point out. Again, I'm an organic grower, have been for 20 years, certified by the USDA, so my statements, I think, are pretty backed up by some history. I don't want you people as conservation agents to be misled by the term organic growing versus conventional growing, and that somehow organic growing is okay. Pesticide that I use pesticides are what I use to kill bugs. The pesticide that I use, if I could mix it up into that glass of water that's in front of Jim there, and you were to drink it, you would die from it. I mean, it's poison. Basically, the difference between an organic pesticide and a conventional pesticide, something, or insecticide, I should say, something to kill bugs, is how long it stays on the plant. And quite frankly, when I spray my insecticides, I could kill bees. If I sprayed during full bloom at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, it's going to kill bees. Just because it's organic, don't be misled. It comes down to the practice. And as long as you're following best management practices, then you will be covered, hopefully, by having a grower there doing the right thing. I always spray my insecticides at night when the bees aren't flying. A conventional insecticide might last 2 days. Mine only lasts 4 hours. Just, again, some background for your future consideration. It was mentioned about doing some restoration on the bog. If you do sort this out for a lease and it is used for agricultural purposes, the NRCS through the USDA does have a number of different grant programs for growers to help them rebuild the flumes, certainly cover your concerns of fish kills by putting nets and stuff up for the flowage of water back and forth. I'm going to conclude my statement with giving you guys one more thing to think about. In your RFP, have it specify for agricultural use as so defined under Massachusetts General Law 125A, including but not limiting to the growth of cranberries. One line, real simple. What will that do? That might encourage someone to come forth who wants to do wetland vegetation plants, wants to increase what plants are growing there naturally so that you can harvest them to give, sell, whatever to some of these people that were in front of you today, where you talked about replenishing plants along the wetlands, along the pond. This is something that I've tried to do with another piece of property that I leased from the town. Because again, cranberry business is just not lucrative and it's not there. So we want to keep agriculture going first and foremost, hoping to keep the cranberry business alive, absolutely, but my intention is to keep agriculture going first and foremost. And I do believe that good agricultural practices will cover all of your concerns, especially addressing RFP. The other thing that I'm very proud of, and I think you should include in it if you do decide to do so, is that the leasee is to get a Massachusetts pesticide applicator's license within a 3-year period, and anything done, applications made within that 3-year period will be done under the supervision of someone with a pesticide license. Because that really covers you guys for some of the concerns you talked about tonight. I do extensive water sampling on my ponds. I do extensive soil and tissue sampling on my bogs. So when you talk about fertilizer, I will put my bogs to your lawns anytime you want. Because when I apply a fertilizer to my bog, I don't have enough money to over-fertilize it. Believe me when I tell you that. I have enough money to put fertilizer on there that I know that plant is going to eat up the nitrogen, eat up the phosphate, and it's not going to go into the groundwater. And I guarantee you, you can pick any lawn that's being fertilized in the town of Harwich. If you want to compare soil and tissue samples from those lawns to my cranberry bog, I'll be very happy to do it, because it's application. The homeowners are over-applying fertilizers. Hands down, they're over-applying fertilizers. The lawn companies are over-applying fertilizers so they can get out there and mow often enough. Cranberry growers aren't doing that. Believe me, we don't have the money to do it. We are putting on exactly what that plant takes up, and it's water management and the management of your applications, which is the key if you decide to go with an agricultural operation. So I would hope you would consider that, and I want to have that in kind of your head when we talk about the other bogs too, because as, and I may call you Paula, as Paula mentioned, she wants to have some town-owned bogs left. There aren't any. There's one on Main Street that's leased by me. There's this one, and there's Great Swamps. Great Swamps is never going to be a cranberry bog again. Hopefully, and we will talk about that in a future date, but hopefully it'll be something where we can turn it into a wetlands restoration project, and we can get some other people involved in it, and I will talk to the board about that later. But there's only one other one, and that's Main Street. And if it wasn't for the agricultural practices being allowed on that property, like the sheep and the goats and the raising of the pigs, there's no way I'd be here in front of you 20 years later still managing that piece of property. Because it was a 20-year lease, it gave me a long enough time to make investments. I made capital investments that I was able to recoup some of the money from, or at least use the property for other things under agricultural uses. And that's why it has worked. 1 year, 2 year, 5 year, 10-year leases in agriculture don't work. Don't work. Stan, you're a businessman, think about it. If you lease a piece of property for 10 years, in the 7th year, are you going to make any capital improvements? No way, because you know it's up in a couple more years. And that's the same thing with cranberry bogs, too. That's why the only good way of doing it, and I stand before you as a 20-year leaseholder, that's the way to do it. Because you have a problem investing money, time, effort, because you're making a life out of it. I made a life out of a lease I had with this town. I made a 20-year commitment, and I raised a child here. I had a business here. I gave back to the community here. I educated people about agriculture, and it was all because of a 20-year lease. Not a 5-year, not a 2-year, not a 10-year. So those are the things you really should think about. And again, I thank you very much for the time.
Thank you. Well, we've heard a lot of comments. Each side, it's really, I think, the preference of everybody here, whether you want to try to make a decision tonight or if you want to wait until a later date. We're really down to the decision whether we post it for
Right.
a bid. And if we were to do that, we have a lot of work to do, as Stan suggested and others have suggested, to improve that bid. And I can picture lots of ways to do that, but we also have some members that don't want to go that route, so.
Well, I guess if we're going to do something, like you said, we got to do it quick. I mean, it's already March. Otherwise, we're going to miss another season.
So, if we were gonna do something tonight, what would that be exactly? I mean, in terms of a motion or
I think
a vote or whatever?
Yeah, the motion would most likely be a motion to proceed to develop a bid package, you know, an RFP, I guess we'd call it, as we've done before. We voted previously to do that, what, 2016?
17.
17. So that's.
We put it out in 18. It was late 2017.
Right. So, I mean, this has been before the commission in 2009. The commission reviewed and voted on this in 2017. So it's
right,
really,
so the previous lease was 2007 to 2017.
Yep. We've had the Board of Selectmen vote urging us to to lease it. We've had a lot of great public comment urging us to lease it. It's hard. It's a change in thinking. It's a change in use. I just, I view it as conservation land first and foremost in the present day. And I view the resources of the Herring River as something that really could be protected by having it as a natural use. So I think you know how I feel. Just a question whether we want, if
Want to vote tonight?
if we should settle it tonight, put it to vote tonight, or have people think about it.
It's not clear to me we can settle it tonight. Just
Well-
based on what people here have said, it's not clear to me there would be a clean resolution to such a vote.
Well, if we vote to put it to lease, then that's what we do. If we vote to not, then we still have to manage the property. And so we would need to get together and discuss
After, yeah, I did, yeah.
what would happen.
Mm-hmm.
And Jim has an idea of maybe having some portion of the bog used for some type of agricultural purposes. That could be fleshed out. But I think what's before us tonight is to go ahead with reissuing the RFP that was put out before.
Well, I would recommend not reissuing the exact same RFP. I would recommend that the vote either be to make it so you have ability to change things, that it either be that you vote to either refine the RFP to put this back out to lease, or that you vote to not have agricultural, or that you vote to naturalize this, or let you vote to not have agriculture there.
To let it go fallow.
Yeah.
Do we have a clear legal view that that's within our realm to let it go fallow? Or that earlier it was referenced that there might have been a reference to the town taking it for agricultural purposes?
What
Are
I
we
have,
positively clean on that, is my question.
what I have, based on everything that people have given me and what I've found, we are authorized to put it into lease, any of the town lands, into agricultural lease.
But
You're
we're
authorized to do it. It is not,
Necessary.
it is not, that I've seen, you don't have to.
Right.
For this particular, there's other areas in town where the language was much more specific.
Okay.
Have you seen the document from 2009 from Copeland and Page? They're not definitive, but they do imply that this and the Jenkins bog were set aside for conservation purposes.
Right, and
So-
not specifically for bogs. I was
Right.
reading
Not
that.
The others,
Not for
right.
only agricultural
Correct.
purposes.
Not for only.
Right, and so that's a key point.
Mhm.
The language was there.
But it doesn't say.
So I think, and we wouldn't just let it go fallow. I think we have a responsibility to manage the
Yeah,
property.
right, but, oh, no,
Sorry.
That doesn't mean that it's definitely conservation.
okay. if
Well, it is for
we're-
conservation.
it's
Definitely
definitely
for conservation,
conservation.
but whether or not
I'd
the
be
conservation.
willing to make a
Commission
motion
leases
to not issue an RFP at this time and develop a management plan.
Not issue an RFP for agriculture at this time.
At this time, and develop a management plan.
I'll second that motion, and then I think we ought to talk about it.
Well, yeah, let's have a discussion.
What do you mean by develop a management plan? I mean, what's the process you have in mind?
I suppose we'll have to have it as a discussion at a future meeting. Maybe some groundwork can be done by the conservation agent, but,
I can definitely provide again the report from the BSC group, which was the land management plan back in 2012.
we would need, stabilization, make sure inflow and outflow gates are secure for the moment, and
I mean, I'd recommend that we
which I.
consider using our conservation funding to help to have somebody help develop a plan if that's the route that you want to go.
Yeah.
It's not something that
In my opinion, not a whole lot is going to happen drastically in a year or two. The gates actually seem to be in good shape. The hydrology seems to be stable. And
not a whole lot in terms of degradation of the hydraulic facilities, but what about growing of plants?
Growing of plants will continue, which is, I think, kind of the goal. And there's a lot of very valuable trees. When we already have tupelo trees 6 or 7 feet tall, if you're standing in the bog, they're trees. But maybe some consideration could be given to leaving a section for a sort of smaller demonstration bog that has water pumped in and out, or that we'd have to work through that. I see that as a possibility, as retaining that historic. Someone could take really diligent care of that 1 acre of bog and produce beautiful organic cranberries, and keep that as part of the experience of going down to the Herring Run and to the Bell's Neck. That could all be discussed. But
We had a discussion on this maybe 2 years ago, and I think we favored hiring the BSC group to look at alternative analysis for different options. So that didn't go forward, but that was an interest we had a couple of years ago.
So it didn't go forward because there wasn't the support on the commission?
I think it was a funding issue that year. I might have even voted for that. Do you remember
There was
that?
funding, but it was also because we voted to issue the RFP.
Yeah, before that,
Oh.
I think we had voted
We
to
didn't,
do it.
yes, there was some funding issues.
What happened, I think we didn't have money, so you appealed to the Division of Ecological Restoration to come by and do a
And
site visit.
it wasn't a high priority for them.
Right.
2 years ago, we have a wetlands account, which is part of our notice of intent fees that goes specifically for conservation wetland purposes. Before 2 years ago, it was not in a revolving fund, and now it is.
Yep.
So there are monies there's actually $23,000 into it. I checked it this week for something else, another project that I'm interested in seeing if you'll fund. But the selectmen, something I'll be chatting with the selectmen with is we're capped at using $6,000 a year out of that. So anyway.
In the BSC group's previous, there actually is a management plan, and they do have recommendations. They have a few different ideas, just trying to foster it as an Atlantic white cedar swamp.
It's an update, but yeah.
Or the possibility of creating a natural flowing stream. Which, but really, if you just closed off the intake flume, there's a good chance that that property could naturalize with very little funding applied to it. I mean, that's happened all over town, all over Cape Cod. Really great results for habitat, for wildlife. So I think there is some discussion to create that management plan.
Any further comments on the discussion? All those in favor of the motion say aye.
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 What is the motion?
The motion made by Jim was to not
Not issue an RFP at this time for agriculture
develop a
and
management
to
plan.
develop a management.
property.
At this time,
Correct.
but it could eventually happen.
If we were to.
I don't want to shut the door, so
Sure.
I need to know how.
That's how it was worded, was at this time.
We
so-
spent
And
a
you
small amount of
also-
money on a firm to develop options for the property. Agriculture would certainly be one of those options. So, I think that's a reasonable approach.
And you had included, Jim, correct me if I'm wrong, the option of potentially a smaller area within that system to continue.
Well, I don't think
production.
we're closing the door on that. I
We're
think
not,
that's
right.
something we should discuss.
How many acres is that bog?
The bog is about 11 acres, a
11
bog
and
And
area.
you're
11 to 12.
only proposing,
Well, we can't
Well,
propose a
One
number at
acre?
this time.
It's not part of
Currently,
it.
roughly
That's not part
9
of the
acres
motion.
of the bog are really pretty far along with the naturalization phase, but there is a couple acres, acre or two, that was planted. I'm not sure what variety it is, but the cranberries actually are very healthy there, and you know,
Closest to the reservoir.
real close to the reservoir, yeah, and that could, with somehow, I'm not sure exactly how, be cordoned off, and
There was a lot of picking there 3 years ago because the crop was so good. It was just
Yeah.
This
on
year
its
too.
own. And so people were just
Yeah.
going there and grabbing some, you know,
so,
maybe that could happen, something like
I
that.
think there is room for some
So you're not
compromise there
shutting
in
the
this
door on it.
discussion,
Mhm.
But you, essentially you are. I mean, in terms of having the larger bog that somebody would be interested in trying to operate. You're gonna minimize to 1 or 2 acres that probably nobody's gonna be interested in. And from what we've heard in the past, that if you don't do that, it's going to naturalize, they're running out of time.
Yeah, you could argue that certain parts of the bog have already run out of time, where you have large trees and native plant communities, and, you know, at some point it's actually protected under the Wetlands Protection Act. And there are certain parts of that property which are borderline, or that could certainly be discussed, but
Right.
there is that one section that is still a functioning cranberry bog also, so I think that's something to be discussed.
I'd just like to say that I think that what Jim is proposing is the responsible thing for us to do. Making a decision based on the input from cranberry farmers, none of whom are telling us that they're actually going to do this. Maybe one or more of you would bid, but we're not getting any clear input that there's somebody who's just raring to go to take this on and manage that whole thing. So, and there are environmental concerns here, there are ecological concerns, and I think that the most responsible thing, we, as the people who are charged with making a decision here and being stewards of this property, is get some professional input from a disinterested party and try to make, and out of that, get a few discrete choices that we can focus on and have a better idea of where they would go than where we are right now, which is a bunch of vague proposals. Like, we should keep this as cranberry cultivated land, but we don't know how we're going to do that, which is pretty vague. I think we should go with, I think this is a great idea.
Amy, how long, what would that time frame be? We asked
For what?
for educated scientific opinion.
Well, we'd have a future, we'd have a future meeting where we would just discuss what would go into, basically, you know, we'd discuss what would go into what we want them to do, to look at.
So we
And
have to
then-
get together and figure out what we want them to do then,
Well, kind of a scope of services, if you will.
and then
And then,
how long do you have any idea how long it would take them to get back to us?
I don't.
I would say that's a 4 to 6 month contract.
That's what I would be
Pretty brief,
thinking.
wouldn't be a lot of money, and we have discussed the task before.
Yep.
You know, we were very close to going that direction, so
Well, we do have some funding available now that we didn't before.
well, I'd like to move
6 months?
the vote, and so all those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
So we have 4, all, those opposed?
Aye.
2 opposed, 4 in favor, so the motion carries. Thank you all for your comments and testimony, and it's,
Thank you for giving us the time.
yep, we'll
Thank you.
have some more discussions.
May I just ask one more question now that you've made that vote?
Yep.
Would you be open to taking requests for maybe purchasing the vines off that bog?
Oh,
I think until we know how we're gonna manage the
Because it would be a
property.
viable time to sell those Stephen vines, go in there with a mower, and maybe somebody might be interested in planting a couple other acres on their own property.
you mean this, like winter, early
For
spring?
March, April.
I would say we won't be ready to make that decision. If you,
So we're out another growing season.
yeah. If you want to put something down on paper, might give us some guidance for this process we're talking about, but we won't be able to act that quickly.
That would help the naturalization if you mow off the vines faster.
Okay, well, thanks. Good ideas, Mr. Hall. Yeah,
Thank you.
thank you all.
You mentioned mentioned the next item you're going to postpone to the
Oh.
3rd.
Yes.
Okay, we can change that date.
And if you can't make it,
Well, I just now sent my check in for my pesticide license classes. I'm mandatory to take 6 hours a
Check the
year.
hearing date.
And I believe it is that date. If it's not, and it's like the 4th, I'll just call Amy, but for some reason, I think it's that date.
I think you
And
need
that
to be
means I
here.
wouldn't be back here in
Yeah,
Harwich until...
we could technically still do it on March 20th, which is our next hearing.
Well, I think we're going to have some good discussion, so I'd rather have it be on a lesser meeting. But
Yeah.
I'll text it. Thank you.
We will, we'll re-put it in the paper correctly, and I'll be in touch. All right, so we don't need to continue that because it's technically not a legal one. Can we get through these orders and extensions?
Yep.
Can we do the orders first? We actually cannot do Red River Beach yet because we had not had an approval from Heritage. And I just got a letter today, but I haven't read it.
Did the commission approve?
Yes.
They did.
Very good.
5 to 1, something like, yeah.
I missed it. Good. Well, I
So-
hope it stands.
Can we
You can go
do,
back and watch it.
well, they've, I think, I looked at the email briefly, I skimmed it, and I'm like, oh, there's a lot of questions there. That's okay, we'll respond. But we cannot do the Town of Harwich Red River Beach orders tonight, but we
Okay.
can do Susan Hollis of 9 Stanley Road.
I wasn't here, so I'm going to excuse myself for a minute.
I hope the language as far as removing sucker growth and things like that are what we talked about.
It seemed pretty simple.
Yeah. More simple than I thought originally. All right. Once everybody's done, would somebody mind taking Brad's place for a minute as chair to ask for a motion once everyone's done looking at it?
Go ahead.
I'd like to make a motion to approve the order of conditions.
I'll second.
For Susan Hollis.
For Susan
Oh,
Hollis.
I'm making the motion. Okay, I make a motion to approve the order of conditions for Susan Hollis at 9 Stanley Road.
And I'll second
Paula,
that.
second.
Yeah. Looks good to
I'm
me.
sorry, is that in favor?
All in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? I thought I was just calling for the vote.
Sorry. Good job. All right, so we'll go to extensions. We already did 11 Harbor. We'll go to Kaiser, Richard and Janet Kaiser for Springtide. So this was for basically land management and restoration. There were some landscaping features they got rid of. And they did a lot of replanting and native or invasive removal. So they're doing well. They've been reporting. They are requesting a 3-year extension to allow for them to be a bit more established. And Nikki did note that a few spots need to be reseeded with a native Cape Cod grass mix that look a little bare. And this was last issued. This is 3 years ago. It was not that old.
Two.
So a 3-year extension for Richard and Janet Kaiser to let their plants continue to naturalize better before they close out.
And you agree?
Yeah, I agree.
I'll make a motion to give an extension, a 3-year extension to Richard and Janet Kaiser at 4 Springtide Lane for their growing season, growing.
I second it.
Seconded by Stan. All those in favor?
Aye.
Please.
Carries.
Amy, do we have to give 3-year extensions? Can we?
No, that's what they asked for. You can ask for less. The next one only wants one.
Okay, good.
And if it becomes debatable, like we've had people come from multiple times, and if you want to, you can give them any length of time up to 3 years.
Like the last time we.
Right,
Yeah.
right. So the next one for Peter Hoppel at 71 Gorham Road. He's asking for a 1-year extension to allow his plantings becoming more established. And there is a chance, it says he's working on buying a neighboring property, so he'd like to keep this open as a possible amendment. The filing was for a removal of a garage, construction of a new garage, addition, front porch, and a new septic. And he had to do some plantings for that,
Lost mine.
which have been done, but he just would like another year for that. I recommend a 1-year extension for 71 Gorham.
I'll make a motion to approve the request for a 1-year extension by Peter Hoppel on 71 Gorham Road.
Second it.
All those in favor, say aye.
Aye. Okay, let's do some certs. There's 2 of them for 11 Atlantic in the campgrounds. And one was for an addition, and the other one was for repair and maintenance of a wall. This is right on the coastal bank. The orders are from 40 years ago and popped up during deed research. So evidently the addition has been done, and the wall, well, we don't know if the maintenance on the wall was done, but the wall is still standing. So I'm guessing that they're looking for a real estate transfer. I'd recommend a certificate of compliance for both 11 Atlantic Streets to clear it.
Should I make a motion?
Like,
I'll make a motion to give an approval for 2 certificates to Eric and Ruth Orne at 11 Atlantic Street for an addition and a repair of maintenance of a wall.
Second it.
Stan seconds it. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Motion carries.
all right, there's 2 here coming at you.
They owned the property for 40 years.
I don't know, but I'm just guessing that's usually when these old ones come up, because the reason you're seeing so many certs of compliance is because Nikki's going
Right.
through the old files, but you see the more recent expired ones first. So this was back from 1980.
Wow.
Eric Skromstad, 4 Water's Edge, dwelling, stairway, and dock. So the work does not match the original plan, which was this, from 2015, but it was recognized recently, and they filed for deviations under an RDA that was approved in 2018. The work matches the most recent approved plan. Recommend a certificate of compliance. Give them a clean slate.
Okay. Motion,
I'll make a motion to approve the certificate of compliance for 4 Water's Edge, dwelling, stairway, and dock.
seconded. All those in favor, say aye.
Who seconded? Sorry. I'm sorry.
Motion carries
I thought
unanimously.
you were calling for a second. Please sign. One more. Uncle Vini's, 33 Uncle Vini's, this was all landscaping activities. This is right on the corner of Bob White Lane and Uncle Vini's Road. And they had some very large, non-native shrubs there in the past. They did replace with a lot of cedars and some other plantings. The work matches what's approved by Phil Cheney, who's a landscape architect. There's one small area by the driveway that we would make note of, that we noted it's a little sparse, to revisit in the spring and add a few plantings if need be. But it's a very small area, and it could just be because it's winter time and things look a little bit more sparse this time of year. There could be some ground covers that we're not picking up on that are there. But, I mean, Nikki went and did this site visit, but I've been various times throughout the process, and they've actually planted more than what they were required to do. So I'd recommend a certificate for Patricia Butler of 33 Uncle
How do
Beans.
those red cedars do?
Not bad.
No, too bad.
So is this the place on the left going toward the beach with a bunch of beach plums right on the street?
Beach plums too, yep. They're doing well, yep.
They had some funny, like, arborvitae type of,
Yeah, Lelands and arborvitaes,
yeah,
and
big things they wanted to get rid of. and-
they got too big, and the previous people had planted them too closely together, so they just
Right.
weren't doing well anyway. But their plants are doing great.
That's a site that does get salt. And
Yeah, they do have irrigation.
Yeah, we,
But that wasn't prevented in there. They had it before, and
they had
that
it
wasn't
before. That-
prevented.
We had a big discussion on whether we could ask them to take it out, and we felt it was inappropriate to, because they already had it.
And also, is just the exposure of the site needed, I
Right.
feel like the plants would need some moisture there.
Well, I move we approve that certificate of compliance.
Second.
Seconded by John. All those in favor?
Aye.
Okay.
Motion carries.
That's all I've got. The minutes we have to do another executive session for, so we can wrap up.
All right. Well, I move that we adjourn.
Second.
Seconded. All those in favor?
Aye.
Thank you very much.